5:30. I will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the October 5th, 2021 meeting of the Salem Planning Commission and Commissioner Goebel's first meeting. So it's good to have you. Shelby, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Augustine,
Here.
Commissioner Goebel,
Here.
Commissioner Griggs,
Here.
Commissioner Heller,
Here.
Commissioner Cacho, I haven't seen him enter yet. Commissioner Levin. I think Commissioner Levin just joined us. Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner McKinley is absent. Commissioner Pollock.
Here.
And Commissioner Slater.
Here.
And I do see that Commissioner Cacho has entered the waiting room. Just going to let him connect to audio so he can say here.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Cacho.
Is present.
Awesome. Thank you. We do have quorum.
Thank you, Shelby. Moving on to public comment, we have two individuals that have signed up to testify. Just as a reminder, as I call your name, if you would state your name and address for the record, that would be appreciated. And the first person I have is Ken Byerly. Ken, are you with us? Yeah, you looks like you're.
I am.
There you go.
Ken, this is the time for you to give your public comment on the Goal 5 motion. So you can proceed with your 3 minutes. And as Commissioner Griggs stated, please state your name and address into the record.
Yes, my name is Ken Beerley. I live at 2308 Ptarmigan Street Northwest in Salem, Oregon. And I simply wanted to provide support for the proposal that Commissioner Slater has concerning exploration of Goal 5. Most other communities in the state have gone through Goal 5 early on in their acknowledgement process. Salem has not. We're in the middle of doing a climate action plan for the city council. There's a draft out. It specifically identifies natural resource protection as a way to ameliorate climate effects. And I really encourage the Planning Commission to support taking action on Goal 5 and to support Commissioner Slater's letter. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Beerley. Do we have questions of Mr. Beerley from the commissioners? And I apologize because I butchered your last name again, and I've known you for many, many years, Ken, so there's really no excuse. I don't see any hands raised from commissioners. Oh, I do. Commissioner Pollock.
Right. Thank you for let me tell you, and thank you, Ken. I just wanted to make sure for the record that you state your background on your written testimony. I think it's really significant if you talk about your background in addition to your testimony. Can you please give that to us?
Currently, I am the chair of the Glen Gibson Creek Watershed Council. I have a master's degree in plant ecology, studying wetland ecology. I was a consultant on wetland and waterway resource issues for 10 years. I worked for the then Division of State Lands, was their wetland program manager for 13 years. I worked for Governor Kitzhaber and his natural resource staff between 1996 and 1999 as the program manager for the Governor's Watershed Enhancement Board. And from 1999 until 2013, I was deputy director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Thank you so much. Phew, that's a lot. That's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners? Mr. Beerley. Thank you, Mr. Beerley. Next, I have Mickey Varney. If you could state your name and address for the record, you also have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mickey Varney, and I live at 1976 Turnage Street Northwest. Good evening. I'm here in support of Commissioner Slater's motion to authorize the Planning Commission to send a letter to City Council requesting funding for the Goal 5 update in the next city budget. Through Goal 5, local governments are asked to create inventories and to develop a plan in order to protect and preserve certain natural resources. I'm not opposed to development. I realize Salem is projected to keep growing in population and that folks need places to live. I support smart planning and development, which can provide protection while accommodating for that growth. Planning is needed to identify and protect wetlands and headwater areas from adverse impacts of development. So why is Goal 5 planning so important? Well, we know our climate is warming. Our air is drier, our forests are burning up, we see less water in our rivers, streams, ponds, and lakes. And as a salmon biologist, I've worked with salmonids for over 30 years. Our salmon and steelhead and trout and native fishes all need fresh water. Salmonids also need oxygenated water that is below 70 degrees. They can't regulate their body temperature themselves, so they have to move to find cold water refugia. And these places of refuge are disappearing. Wetlands play an important role in preserving the life-sustaining attributes of our waterways. They filter runoff, which improves water quality downstream. They provide shade, which lowers water temperatures. Their ability to hold and distribute water during periods of high runoff provide natural flood control and later add to decreasing flows as the streams dry up. In other words, they provide and maintain essential habitat for fish and other aquatic organisms. So why is Goal 5 so important now? Because Salem has kicked this can down the road for too long. We are hitting a tipping point of no return. Once these valuable areas disappear, they're not coming back. This reminds me of 50 years ago when the climax of an environmental crisis caused by rampant pollution resulted in the establishment of Earth Day, the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Air Act. We've seen a lot of changes in our climate in the past 2 years. I'm anticipating this heat wave isn't going to go away anytime soon, and we can't afford to wait another 5 or 10 years to start planning for how we're going to preserve waterways and wildlife habitat in and around Salem. So please support Commissioner Slater's motion. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Varney. Any questions from the commissioners? Seeing no hands raised. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the consent calendar. Commissioner Slater, do you have a motion?
I do, and I apologize, I don't have the material right in front of me, but I'd like to move adoption of the previous meeting's minutes, please.
Okay, from September 21st, 2021. Do I have a second on that motion? Anybody?
Second.
Commissioner
Second,
Levin.
Levin.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second discussion on the motion. Shelby, will you please call the roll and signify if you're in favor of it by saying aye or nay if you are opposed?
Commissioner Augustine,
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Heller,
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock,
Aye.
and Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll move on then to public hearings, section 5.1, a discussion on the Unified Development Code Amendment, case number CAZC 21-01. Mr. Bishop from staff will be leading this discussion. And I think if it's okay with you, Bryce, if we do it similarly to what we've done in the past, where you do one section at a time, and then we have questions from the commissioners and a dialogue, and then move on and move on and move. And at the end, then we'll have the public testimony at the very end.
Sure, that works for me.
Sounds great. You can go ahead.
There, I have a criteria statement prepped
Oh, yeah, sorry.
before this.
Statement
That's
of
okay.
criteria. Yep.
This is a public hearing to consider a code amendment and a legislative zone change, case number CAZC 21-01 for proposed amendments updating the Unified Development Code and other applicable chapters of the Salem Revised Code, together with a legislative zone change to change the zoning of specific identified properties within the downtown that are currently zoned RH for multiple family high-rise residential, CO commercial office, and CR retail commercial to CB Central Business District. The criteria applicable to this application are found in Salem Revised Code, SRC, chapters 110.085 B for amendments to the Unified Development Code, UDC, and 265.010 D for legislative zone changes. Failure to raise an issue prior to the close of the public hearing with statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Planning Commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, on that issue. A similar failure to raise constitutional issues relating to proposed conditions of approval precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony. The Planning Commission will then either continue the public hearing or leave the record open for at least 7 days.
Thank you, Shelby.
Madam President,
Yes. Is that Commissioner
we have
Slater?
yes, we have a couple members from Public Works here to speak about the tree issue. I'm wondering if we could bring section 808 up to the front so that they can participate and then they don't have to stay with us for the rest of this hearing.
I'm fine with that. Mr. Bishop, how do you feel about that?
I think that sounds fine and dandy. I can manage that. Let me just get there.
Thank you.
Okay. So I will begin then. Thank you, President Griggs, members of the commission, Bryce Bishop with the City of Salem Planning Department. I'm here to present the staff report for the proposed UDC amendments that are before you this evening. For those of you that don't know, real quick, I'm going to jump back, a little bit on the slide so people have a little bit of a preface here who may not know what the UDC is. The Unified Development Code is our consolidated land use and development code that was adopted back in May of 2014. It was a culmination of a multi-year project to take our land division ordinance, our zoning code, and various public works development standards or public works infrastructure chapters and merge them into one document. So the amendments before you tonight are the amendments to the UDC. Prior to leading up to this, there were 4 work sessions that were open to the public that were held to discuss the proposed amendments, and we are back here tonight to actually consider these through the formal public hearing process. So in terms of the changes to the tree preservation requirements, if you recall back in our work sessions, we had some changes where we were going to propose to expand the definition of significant tree, to include a greater variety of trees. We're still doing that, as you can see in the amendments that are in your packet this evening. Originally, we had proposed to expand the tree preservation requirement, to expand the definition of significant tree to include Oregon white oaks and any tree greater than 40 inches in diameter. We've since changed that. We have an expanded definition of significant tree now that includes not only the existing significant trees, which are Oregon white oaks currently under the code, but also we're lowering the DBH down to 20 inches diameter at chest height for the definition of significant tree. So any oak that's 20 inches or greater in DBH is considered a significant tree, plus any other tree of 30 inches or more DBH. So we've expanded the definition of significant tree to preserve more mature trees within the city. In addition to that, we are changing the tree preservation or the tree conservation plan requirements that are required in connection with land divisions. So a partition or a subdivision to preserve a minimum of 30% of the trees, the existing trees on the property under the tree conservation plan. So today it's 25. So we've increased that to 30. The original proposal that we'd been to the Planning Commission with and during the work sessions was 50. So we've dialed that back. So we're at 30 now, so a slight increase, but with, expanded preservation of significant trees. So the 30% that needs to be preserved are all the trees on the property, and existing significant trees on the property can count towards that 30% preservation requirement under the tree conservation plan. Another change that has remained consistent from the previous version that you'd seen to the proposed amendments are the requirement to identify the critical root zone of the trees on the tree conservation plan. Staff is proposing to add this to the amendments to ensure essentially it's kind of having better data when we look at tree conservation plans. Now we don't know, what the extent of the root zones are and how those root zones relate, to the building envelopes of proposed lots. So in a lot of circumstances, tree conservation plans are approved, and then after the lots are platted, builders have purchased the lots and they come in and develop, and are asking for building permits for the homes on the lots. And it turns out that there are, in instances, requirements to or applications to amend the tree conservation plan because the roots in relation to the building footprints and the grading that's required to build the homes, just don't allow the tree to be saved and or could be saved, but the damage to the roots are so critical that the tree could be hazardous and be a liability for the future owners of the home on that lot. So by showing the tree conservation plan or the critical root zones on the tree conservation plan, the idea is to hopefully be able to get an understanding for whether or not the lots that are being proposed will actually be able to save those trees that are identified to be preserved on the tree conservation plan. So we eliminate the need to have further adjustments down the line. And as part of that, so when you do your tree conservation plan, you show all your critical root zones of all the trees, and the critical root zone, for everybody's information, there's a ratio that we apply to it, and it's based on the diameter of the tree, the DBH of the tree. So the critical root zone is a radius of 1 foot for every 1 inch of DBH of the tree. So if you had a 30-inch significant tree, there would be a 30-foot radius, out from, the tree. So essentially a 60-foot diameter circle that would encompass the tree and be the area where you'd have to have a silt fence around, above ground silt fence to identify the area where the roots and branches are to be protected, and you can't have any grading or cutting of branches or site disturbance or parking of vehicles or putting a fill in that area to ensure that the tree is preserved. We do, under the new tree protection measures under 808-046, allow for grading or disturbance of the critical root zone. You can go up to 30% of the area. So you are leaving 70% of the critical root zone intact, and the 70% area of the root zone left intact is kind of the minimum or is the maximum disturbance that should be allowed based on studies from arborists to ensure that the tree won't be in jeopardy of decline. If you disturb more than 70%, that would be an issue. But in order to get to the 70%, you'd have to have an arborist report, or in order rather to encroach 30%, you'd have to have an arborist report, and then you would have to follow all the recommendations in the arborist report to make sure that that you won't do any damage to the tree in the course of disturbing that 30% of the critical root zone. And then we've identified some exceptions to tree removal permits, and we've eliminated some exceptions. So a tree removal permit applies, when you have a protected tree on a property. So if you're doing a commercial development or a multifamily development and you have a significant tree on the property, or you have a riparian corridor that is on a property, the trees in the riparian corridor, the significant trees, those are protected trees. So you can't remove those without a tree removal permit. So we've added a couple exemptions from the permit requirements. If a tree that's a city tree, which is a tree on city property, if that needs to be, removed, we've exempted that from the requirement to get a tree removal permit, because there's a whole separate chapter in the Salem Revised Code, which is chapter 86, that deals with that. And then there are situations where we have hazardous trees, and there has been an issue where the property owner can't, afford to deal with the hazard, and it's presenting an issue to surrounding property owners and presenting a danger. So in certain circumstances, we have issued formal orders to remove the tree because it's hazardous, to minimize any danger to surrounding properties. And in those cases, the city is issuing a formal order to remove a tree due to a hazard. We're exempting that from the requirement to get a tree removal permit. So that is just a brief, that's kind of a brief summary of the significant changes that are being made to Chapter 808. And I guess I'd open up to commissioners for questions. And then
Using raise the hand, will you let me know if you have a question for Bryce at this point on this section? Commissioner Pollock.
Thank you very much, Bryce. We had a comment from an arborist. I don't have it in front of me. I kept it as an electronic document. So
is that from Woody Dukes?
yeah, she was concerned about the term hazardous tree as high risk. Can you explain the difference and if that's worth changing?
I'm not aware of the difference. It didn't sound, I believe a comment from a state employee who was a forestry expert. And it sounds like, high risk tree is a more modern term. I don't think there's no real justification, I don't think, under, to change it. We have hazardous tree, there's a specific definition for it. It's I don't see a pressing need to change that. And it didn't seem from reading the comments that there was a very large pressing need to change it either, but it just kind of a more of like for information, kind of the current term of art would be a high risk tree, but high risk versus hazardous. Hazardous has this very specific definition in our code, and that's what we go by.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pollock. Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. I'm wondering if I could invite Patricia Farrell, who is the city's natural resource officer, to speak at this point.
Good evening.
Would
Yes.
that be appropriate? Great. Thank you, Patricia. One of the things that I hear is a concern that if we leave large trees intact, it creates difficulty in placing buildings and building envelopes, and it makes things just more challenging in the construction environment. And why can't we simply replace a mature tree with a younger tree, or even like some cities do, you take one large tree, you put in 2 new trees? Can you speak to us a little bit about the value, both from a climate perspective and an ecology perspective, of mature trees?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Patricia Farrell. I'm the Parks and Natural Resources Planning Manager and also the Climate Action Plan Manager. So large trees and trees in general are one of the few ways we can actually sequester carbon. And so that it's very important in our Climate Action Plan to recognize that the preservation of trees is one way that we can keep carbon locked up in beautiful trees. The bigger the tree, the more carbon that not only that they store, but also that they can take in, because they have a larger leaf area. They store carbon through photosynthesis process. So yeah, that's part of our Climate Action Plan. We have a specific strategy related to preserving large trees and protecting them during development. And then also, in addition to the carbon sequestration, there's a whole range of other community and ecological benefits to trees, and large trees in particular, because they intercept a lot of rainfall. So they reduce stormwater runoff. They reduce our urban heat island impact from impervious surfaces by shading and evapotranspiration. And then large trees also provide a lot of wildlife habitat benefit. In addition, I'll just add that it's also been shown that large trees on property actually increase the value of the property, and that people can sell their lots for more money, or people are willing to pay more money for lots that have large trees on it.
Patricia, I have a follow-up question related to, this is Jane, to your comment about the large trees. It seems in my head that if we have this blanket requirement that the perimeter silt fence needs to be put around all trees, small or large, and we have to preserve 30% of the trees, that if you have that requirement, I would think a person or a developer would tend to want to take out a big tree, because the scope of that critical root zone is larger than a smaller tree, and it doesn't matter if 30% are large trees or small trees. Do you see my point?
Yes, I do. And I would probably agree with your interpretation.
Has there been any discussion, and maybe this is Bryce too, about determining which trees really need to have that critical root zone protected? I would think the significant trees, that's an obvious point that I would look to ensure that, or are you still considering just blanket all trees, knowing that you might then have an unintended consequence of removing big trees?
I will say that this is Bryce, for all trees, it's only the trees that are identified for preservation under the tree conservation plan. So it's not like 100% of the trees on the lots have to have the tree protection zone around them. You need to identify, on the original tree conservation plan, the tree protection or the critical root zone for all the trees. But in terms of when it comes to protection, it's only the trees that you're saving. So if you're saving the minimum 30%, it would be a minimum of, a minimum of 30, those 30% of the trees have to have the protection zone around them or the fence. By expanding the definition of significant tree from just 24-inch significant or oaks to include 20-inch oaks, and then any other tree that's 30 inches or greater in DBH, we do get at that protection to prevent folks from removing big trees, because a significant tree has to be protected regardless. So if you had 10 significant trees on the property, you have to preserve those 10 significant trees unless you can demonstrate, under the code today, there are approval criteria that would allow a significant tree to be removed if you can demonstrate that there are no reasonable design alternatives that would enable that tree to be saved with the development.
Catch that.
So, but the significant tree definition expansion to include trees 30 inches or greater in DBH would, prevent individuals from taking down the larger mature trees.
Okay. Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. I'd also like to invite Mylan Davis, who's the city's urban forester, to comment if I could. And I'd particularly like to hear from Mylan what his thoughts are about the tree preservation standards related to construction and whether or not they are important and what they might benefit us with. Mylan, if you could speak to that.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's very important for numerous reasons. I share the sentiment with Patricia, and that preserving larger trees is going to do all the things she just mentioned, plus, from a standpoint of property value. But for us, it's maintaining the larger trees is going to make the world of difference in a growing city where we're losing a lot of trees, weekly. From a city standpoint, we are losing trees per infrastructure, per the ice storm, and I think it's a great step in the right direction for lowering the size of Oregon white oaks. We saw that a lot of the trees we lost during the storm, Oregon white oaks that were around the 24-inch size were 200 to 300-year-old trees. So, that's an amazing resource, and it's a heritage tree that should definitely be considered for this lower DBH size. I think that, if you go and cut down a 20-inch tree, Oregon white oak, at this time in Bush Park or any area in town, you'd see that tree was well over 100 years old. So I think that having the ability to preserve that tree goes a long way to increasing native wildlife, just our native ecosystem in general here in the Willamette Valley. So being able to hang on to those trees is very important. As far as, raising the size of 30-inch trees to encompass all trees, I know that's not something that we've done yet, but I would also agree with that and want to have the ability to at least have that conversation. I don't think that all trees over 30 inches necessarily fit into that. There may be some trees, tree of heaven, empress tree, maybe consider cottonwoods. Sorry, I have the kids. I have 3 kids with me at the moment, so they're being good. But so yeah, I don't know if you have any more questions for me, but I definitely very excited that you guys are bringing this up for consideration and definitely back it.
Okay, Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for either Ms. Farrell or Mr. Davis? Or Bryce? Don't want to get them off the hook so easily. Commissioner Pollock.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the tree conservation plan adjustments, particularly section D, where it's the approval criteria. And I want to make sure that we're really, really clear that it says here, there are special conditions that could not have been anticipated at the time the tree conservation plan was submitted to create unreasonable hardship, practical difficulties, which can be most effectively relieved by an adjustment to the tree conservation plan. The key thing here is anticipated at the time the plan was submitted. You know, I really worry, you know, because this in a lot of different areas of law, the ad could not be anticipated at the time. You know, that's, you know, it's foreseeable. There's so many litigations on the issue of foreseeable, but I want to know, is it, would it have to be, I mean, it would have to be pretty severe for you to be, you know, for not have to anticipate it, I would think, but what is your spin on that language?
Is that for me, Commissioner Pollock?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So I think, quite frankly, we have been, as staff, probably generous in the interpretation of that criteria. Could not have been anticipated. A lot of our tree conservation plan adjustments that are submitted are based on, well, grading, you know, and the
Right.
foundation of the house is too close to the root zone and, you know, can't be built. So I think that's part of the reason why, you know, if we have better data, you know, best available science when we're, you know, when subdivisions are being laid out and we have these preservation requirements and we're seeing, you know, how the lots are arranged with the streets and the grading plans and the critical root zones of the trees in relation to the building footprints, it allows, you know, the developer staff, I think everybody to have a better understanding of what's really possible, you know, with the tree conservation plan. Now, I would say we're kind of flying a little bit blind. You know, we just, you know, the tree conservation plan is laid out. Trees are identified to be preserved and removed. Trees that are preserved are generally in the rear lot. Sometimes they're kind of placed, you know, on the side lot lines between homes. But, you know, when you look at the setbacks of a RS zone lot, minimum 5 foot, and, you know, applicants and homeowners want, and people that are buying lots wanting to maximize the building footprint of their lots, you know, it's, you know, having a tree, you know, on the common property line between two lots with 5 foot setback on either side, you know, doesn't necessarily bode well for the preservation of the tree. So I think by having better data up front in terms of, you know, what is the extent of the trees in the root zones, we can, you know, have better results and not have so many tree conservation plan adjustments in the future, and have trees that actually can, you know, be saved, and property owners won't want them to take them down because they're maybe too close to their house, or, you know, the roots have been compromised, you know, to the extent that there might be a, you know, concern about a hazard there.
Commissioner Pollock, did you have a follow-up?
I do. Oh my gosh. Oh, right. So the question was, so we now, to give us that data, we now require a grading plan earlier. I think we had to change the code. So we're asking for a grading plan earlier so that that would be useful for the tree plan.
Yeah, that is correct. In the last UDC update in 2019, we added a grading plan to land divisions and other applications.
So that would definitely help with both foreseeable and anticipated possible, you know, so that we don't have to have an adjustment except under extreme situations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I wanted to point that out because, you know, I would hate where we have it like a great tree plan and then we have to come back and say, oh, well, we didn't notice this, but it could have been foreseeable. We just, you know, I just want to make that clear. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Levin, followed by Commissioner Goebel.
Thank you. A couple of questions I have. First question is about the ratio of lineal distance and radius from the center of tree out based on the caliper width or inch diameter of the tree. Where does that ratio come from?
It's a kind of an industry. It's kind of an industry standard. I don't know, is Mylan still on?
Yes, he is.
Maybe I'd ask Mylan to kind of speak to that. You know, the
He might be chasing children right now. Mylan, are you
maybe
there?
or Patricia.
No, that's an industry standard, just ANSI standard and forestry standard, U.S. Forest Service standard. So that's pretty much an industry standard.
Okay, so then follow up on the same lines. Bryce, when somebody is developing, is this, will this pertain to existing lots that are being remodeled and redeveloped? Or will this development standard apply to only new subdivisions?
So existing lots, you know, the provision, you know, these new provisions would come into play for new partitions and new, you know, subdivisions, because the tree conservation plan is a requirement for land division. So if the land division is already, if the subdivision or partition is already platted, lots are undeveloped, you know, they would be subject to whatever tree conservation plan that was previously approved, you know, for that subdivision, you know, or partition. So yeah, so it would affect new land divisions. Now, the portion of this that speaks to significant trees, you know, expansion of the definition, you know, from you know, just Oregon white oaks of 24 inches to those with 20 inches, or then all other trees of 30 inches, that would apply. That's a significant trees are a special category of trees that are protected regardless of whether or not there's a land division. But if you've had a subdivision approval with a tree conservation plan and investment back expectations in terms of what can be done on those lots based on an approved plan and a layout of lots, I don't believe we could retroactively go back and invalidate, you know, platted lots as long as a subdivision is still valid. The tree conservation plan, you know, has not expired because the subdivision is still platted. If there was now a 30-inch tree that was identified in the original tree conservation plan for removal, I don't believe, and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, assistant city attorney, but I don't think we could, you know, go and then, you know, insert, you know, our new requirements into that existing tree conservation plan that says, oh, that 30-inch tree originally designated for removal is now a significant tree, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mr.
Bryce is right. You know, the rules apply at the time that the approval is given. So if they already have a plan in place and it's been approved, then that's the plan that applies, and you can't change the rules.
Are you good, Commissioner Levin? Did you have a follow-up?
Yes, one more follow-up for Bryce. So just to, I'm you know, we write codes, and I love that the city is amending the codes more frequently than historically, because there are little errors. And even the first write of the UDC, there were some issues that stuff didn't quite work out, and it was intended a certain way, but the application based on how certain things interact with other development standards or codes, that it caused conflict that it simply didn't work in certain areas. And so amendments were made, and I like that we're doing continued ones. And so I just want to make sure that we're not creating any unintended consequences with this. And so I want to nitpick again the idea of the individual lot. So is there any crossover of the significant tree, especially the Oregon white oak, as far as existing lot with an existing structure on it, that any of these standards are going to apply to?
It would.
Okay.
Because at that point, you know, the tree conservation plan is binding only until like the lots are platted, you know, and then built. You know, once you complete, you know, the construction of the home, you know, on the lot, you know, then the tree conservation plan essentially has been exercised and it's done. So in that circumstance, or if you have an old lot in the city, you know, that has a house on it, an existing lot that, you know, that has a house, you know, that didn't have a tree conservation plan, that has a 30-inch tree on it, that today is not a significant tree, it will be a significant tree under these proposed amendments. And so if you wanted to, you know, remove that tree, you'd have to get a tree removal permit to do that.
Yeah, and so that's where I'm going, is there's a lot of where the code is written thinking of, and we've been talking about in case studies, a subdivision in the theoretical application of this and clearing for future lots. Where I see conflict with code and development standards from the real estate side a lot is the infill or the reuse and reapplication of property. And that's where unintended consequences are applied, because like the reference that, well, code standards applied based on when the application went in. Well, if we have really, really old property that doesn't meet today's development standard size and it's like too small, then there aren't any considerations that are given for those. And so as those properties, other properties like the one that I'm kind of is in the back of my mind is a residence to be remodeled where there's a significant white oak. And it's funny because all my experience on the planning commission, I pointed out to all the design professionals like, hey, that's a significant white oak right there. Like nobody's going near that. And everybody kept saying, well, we could leave those ones over there and we could take this one down. I was like, no, you're not. You're not going to win that argument with anybody. And so the thought is though that home needs remodel and it is existing within this 36-foot diameter to this tree. So if there's foundation work that needs to be done, how is that successfully done without an exorbitant amount of cost to the property owner, where they're dealing with just trying to fix something or remodel something?
Well, so in terms of the criteria for a tree removal permit, there are, because if it's outside a land division and it's a significant tree and somebody's doing remodeling, it's a protected tree. And then, you can't remove it through a tree conservation plan because that's only for land division. So you're really left with either a tree conservation plan or a tree permit, a removal permit, or if you don't meet the criteria for a tree removal permit, a variance or a tree conservation plan variance, and there's either a hardship variance or an economical use variance. So let me just share my screen here and I'll bring up chapter 808 and so we can look at this together. And so in terms of the requirements for tree and vegetation removal permits, there are a whole list under 808, 030, A1 or A2 rather, that are exceptions. And so so if you're going to remove a significant tree or protect a tree in a riparian corridor, you have to get a permit, and then here's the exception. So if I recall, if you look, through the list here, there are some that deal with like maintenance of existing structures or necessary maintenance of existing structures that were, constructed prior to a certain date. So there are certain exceptions that are granted, from the tree removal permits requirements under, the subsection, A2. The approval criteria for a tree removal permit, there are currently 4 criteria. One, it's a hazardous tree under D1 here. So if it's a hazardous tree and you can demonstrate that it is a hazard, then that is one of the criteria that you can meet to demonstrate that to have the tree removed. Another one is if you're doing repair, alteration, or replacement of existing structures. And so here is the one I was thinking of, is an actual approval criteria. So if you're doing any work to repair, alter, or replacement or an otherwise lawfully existing structure as of June 21st, 2000, then it provides parameters here of how you can remove a significant tree if you meet and meet the criteria for a permit if you meet these requirements. Another one is if it's a water dependent activity. And the final one is if you're doing restoration activity within a riparian corridor. Under these amendments, I will point out we're adding a 5th one, and that's if you are doing a commercial or a multifamily commercial or industrial development and you need to remove a significant tree. We're establishing a criteria that allows you to remove it if you can demonstrate that there's no reasonable design alternatives to save the tree, and saving the tree would force you to get an adjustment or a variance to a development standard in order to reasonably develop your property. So if you needed to move, if you had to get an adjustment to a building setback because of this tree, and there's no reasonable ways to, move it around to still save the tree, then that would be a new criteria for a removal of a significant tree. But so there is this repair, alteration, or replacement of existing structures that would give, some relief, in that respect. If the tree is not, or if the structure doesn't qualify and you don't meet any of the criteria here, then the recourse is getting a tree variance. And then essentially have to demonstrate that the requirement to preserve the tree, results in an economic, or like essentially a taking of your land, and you can't, do anything with it. Or, there's a couple different criteria. There's economical use or hardship. And so hardship is there are special conditions that apply to the property which create unreasonable hardships or practical difficulties which can be most effectively relieved by a variance. And then there's a second one, and it's the variance is the minimum necessary to otherwise allow the proposed activity. And then economic use is when you suffer essentially a taking of your property. So economic use is probably a more challenging one to address. Hardship would be more of an easier path to take if you needed to do a variance.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I should have made this point in the beginning, that my thought is that not necessarily to take out the tree, but the tree preservation that root assessment thing is what kind of triggered this, that would somebody not be able to disturb the soil around the home because it's within that 36 feet?
You would be able to go essentially under the proposed standard, you go 30% of that area you could disturb with an arborist report demonstrating that you can be in that area and not jeopardize the health and stability of the tree. And then you follow any recommendations in the report in terms of how you grade and how you deal with the roots and to minimize damage to it.
Okay.
You have to follow up, Commissioner Levin, are you good?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Commissioner Goebel.
Thank you. I have just one minor grammatical correction and then one question. So under E2 of section 808.035, it says all trees and native vegetation designated for preservation it should say be protected, so that B should not be struck out.
Okay, thank you for that. We will make sure to get that fixed.
Thank you. And then my question is under the applicability section of that same 808.035, with eliminating the clause of if the development proposal will result in the removal of trees. And my question is, what is the value of requiring a tree conservation plan for a development proposal that will not result in any removal of any trees? And recognizing the significant cost of a tree conservation plan. And my question to Bryce or others, if they have more input on that, is what's the value of requiring this for proposals that won't remove trees?
The simple benefit is that, people say they're not going to remove trees and inevitably they do. And in the past, we put a condition of approval on it that says you can't remove the tree because you didn't want to take the time and effort to do the tree conservation plan up front. And then so if you come in down the road and say, oh, well, actually we did need to remove a tree. And then now you've, had a tree conservation a development approved without the tree conservation plan. We have put conditions on that land division in the past to say, well, you don't want to do a tree conservation plan because you're not going to remove the trees. So you shall not remove any trees in conjunction with the development. That just puts people into a situation where if they have to remove a tree, then they have to either amend the subdivision or petition decision, or they have to come in afterwards and, ask for, well, I guess the main thing would be, or if the subdivision has been platted and final and it's a condition on the land use decision, they'd have to ask for a variance to get out of the standard. So by doing a tree conservation plan up front, it's an insurance policy to allow essentially, if by some chance there an unforeseen circumstance that you couldn't have anticipated at the time of the original development, and a tree needs to come out, that allows you to do a tree conservation plan adjustment later. If not, you're kind of locked into committing to save all the trees.
Did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Goebel? Are you good?
I don't have a follow-up. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions of Bryce on this section before we move to another section? Commissioner Slater, did we have everybody that you wanted to address the commission?
You
Speak?
did.
Okay.
Yeah, and my appreciation to them.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, well, without further questions, we're ready to move on.
Okay, all right, thank you. So kind of going back now towards the beginning of my presentation. So the first major highlight is the amendments that are proposed for House Bill 2001, which was approved in 2019, and it was passed by the state. And what it does, as you recall, requires local jurisdictions throughout the state to allow middle housing, which is single family or townhouses, 2-family uses, 3-family uses, 4-family uses, and cottage clusters on lots that are in residential zones where single family dwelling units are allowed. And the whole idea is to increase the diversity and selection of housing in neighborhoods to get at, the housing crisis that the state is experiencing, and also to promote affordability and an increase in inventory in urbanized areas where, facilities are available, streets are built, sewer, everything is in place. So infill on facilities rather than necessarily, needing to go outside of that. So it's another tool in the tool chest to, promote, increased housing development within, cities across the state. So under these amendments, we have to amend our residential zones that allow single family uses. So that includes the RA, which is the residential agriculture zone, the RS single family residential, the RD duplex residential, and the RM1 lower density multifamily residential zone. And in association with these amendments, we've had to establish new minimum lot size standards for these middle housing uses. So today, the minimum lot size for a single family dwelling is 4,000 square feet. That remains the same. Under House Bill 2001, we have to treat duplexes essentially the same in terms of, and the other middle housing, the same as we do with, single family, but in terms of lot size, duplexes and single family need to be the same. So today, you can only do a duplex on a corner lot that's 7,000 square feet in size. Under House Bill 2001, you can do a duplex anywhere in a residential zone on a lot that's 4,000 square feet in size, similar to what you can do with a single family dwelling in terms of location today. And then for a 3-family use or a triplex on a lot, you can have, it's a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, and for a 4-family use of 4 units on a lot, or 4 attached units in a quadplex configuration, it's a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet. So that was the changes to lot size. Setback, lot coverage, and height requirements are staying the same as they are for a single family today. So that means 5 feet setbacks on the sides of the lots, 12 feet, for the front, 20 feet for a garage next to the street, and then in the rear, 14 feet or 20 feet, depending on if the structure is single story or 2-story. One additional requirement that was established with the bill is a requirement for 100-foot setback abutting a waterway for new middle housing applications. So when you look through the RA, RS, RD, and RM1 zones, you'll see that there is a new section of the tables under the setback table that discuss the waterway setback. So it's 100 feet from the top of bank on either side of the waterway that will now apply. And that, is a requirement of House Bill 2001, but it only applies, based on how House Bill 2001 directs us to apply it at this point. And it is, only to new middle housing, on lots. So it doesn't apply to single family, and it would also not apply, it applies in PUDs as well, but only in new planned unit developments where middle housing is proposed in those planned unit developments that are newly created. And if you have an existing lot where there's an existing middle housing development, the building can be rebuilt in the same footprint. So you can still reuse the building, rebuild the building if it were to be destroyed, but it can't get any bigger or any closer, to the riparian corridor. There are also some exemptions that are included in the amendments that deal with exemptions for boundary street and sidewalk improvements, and also an exemption from needing to provide additional parking for single family detached dwellings that are converted to a duplex, triplex, or a quadplex. And that comes from the House bill as an incentive to encourage folks to, and also to make sure we treat single family dwellings that converted to middle housing the same as we do for single family dwellings. If a street, today we don't require boundary street or sidewalk improvements for existing single family dwellings, and so we make that a consistent exemption for single family detached dwellings converted to middle housing, so that those don't apply. And then for single-family detached dwellings converted to middle housing uses, the bill specifically, allows or requires that no additional parking, needs to be or can be required for that. They can provide more parking, but we can't require more parking of a development of a single-family home that's converted to a single-family. Or a single-family home that's converted to a duplex, triplex, or quadplex. Sorry about that. I got a little garbled. And then also we have an existing requirement under the code that was established back in 2008 when we were doing our infill standards, and that required a garage to be constructed for all new single-family and duplex dwellings. Under House Bill 2001, that specifically prohibits that type of requirement. A garage can be provided if the applicant or the homeowner or the builder elects to provide one, but we can't require a new garage. So that's eliminated. And then you received a supplemental staff report today that had some additional proposed amendments. One of those additional sets of amendments are proposed amendments to the city's compact development overlay zone, which is chapter 631. The compact development overlay zone was in a way kind of a precursor, to the requirements what we're seeing being implemented in House Bill 2001 here, and that allowed for a slight increase in the allowed density in areas that were subject to like a neighborhood plan housing study, or they were on a busier street. And so this compact development overlay zone applies throughout different areas of the city in small pockets. There's a large pocket of it in West Salem in the kind of the more historic area of West Salem, along Edgewater, Walker, Girth, McNary, that area. The compact development overlay zone was applied to a large swath of land. Then there are other, spotty areas where it's applied to like one or two parcels throughout the city. And then along Market Street, there's a kind of a linear strip of compact development overlay that applies to single family homes along Market Street. And the intent there was to allow for a little bit of increased density residential use that's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And in doing that, the compact overlay zone allowed up to 3 units on a lot, but it had a minimum lot size requirement, for instance, of 3,000 square foot per dwelling unit. So if you wanted to do a 9,000 or a triplex on a lot, you'd have to have a 9,000 square foot minimum lot size, which directly conflicts, with the requirements of House Bill 2001. So we've proposed to add that. It's kind of a late minute addition because it was, we have so many overlay zones. It's sometimes hard to catch, all the areas where there could be a conflict or an issue, but that was, caught and that's been added. And because we don't want to have a situation where we have a compact overlay zone that applies to single family residential RS zone property, and it has standards in it that are different than what House Bill 2001 requires. So the amendments that are proposed in the supplemental staff report, to chapter 631, they essentially, really, make, chapter 631, very kind of meaningless and toothless. And that's by design because, we want the underlying zone and the standards that are being adopted through House Bill 2001 to apply and not the standards of the compact overlay zone. And furthermore, as indicated in the staff report, as part of the RSALM process, the compact development overlay zone is proposed to be phased out. So it will be going away and will be repealed, under the current proposal for RSALM. This is kind of an intermediary step that, makes sure that there isn't any conflict between the overlay zone and the RS zone requirements under House Bill 2001.
Okay, are you ready for some questions?
I'm ready.
I bet you we have them. Okay, commissioners, Commissioner Pollock. You're muted, Commissioner Pollock.
Okay, great. So I want to clarify something on the waterway 100 foot. So that's 100 foot, a change from 50 foot. Is that correct?
I will caveat that with the 50 foot today is the required riparian corridor width that's established in our tree preservation ordinance. Now, the riparian corridor is not an explicit setback. It is an area where you have to preserve trees and native vegetation.
Okay.
So if you have a lot that has a 50-foot riparian corridor on it under chapter 808, which that's where that riparian corridor standard comes from, if there's no native vegetation and there are no trees in that riparian corridor, you can be within the 50-foot setback. It's only if there is native vegetation and trees that are within that 50-foot area that are protected, that it becomes kind of a quasi, de facto setback.
Okay. And then of course it's the waterway setback as it applies to the current waterway map until it gets revised, correct?
That would be correct. Yes.
Yeah. I just want to clarify that, especially since we had everybody testifying about needing to go forward and changing our goal 5 and our waterway map. And then the other thing I wanted to do is a new compact development thing. So on the setbacks. So what I'm looking here is like you getting rid of all the setbacks. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes.
Because that seemed to be the biggest deal that was preventing infill development was those setbacks on the compact. So I'm happy to see this.
And it's also part of a
taken care
greater effort, that we have, when the UDC was originally adopted, there was recognition that we have a lot of overlay zones. And so with this amendment, we are getting rid of 2 overlay zones that I will discuss later that are associated with the changes to the CB zone. But, this overlay zone will be going away eventually with our Salem. And this is, again, just an intermediary step to make sure that what we have left on the books after this amendment and with the amendments to House Bill 2001 being enacted, that we don't have a conflict that we're having to deal with. And it's like, oh, we missed that. So.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Bryce.
Thank you, Commissioner Pollock. Any other questions for Bryce on this section? Give me a second to weigh in. I'm not seeing any hands. So Bryce, I think we're ready to move.
Okay. All right. So here's a few highlights of other changes that we're making in order to bring the code up to date with current changes in state law. So the first one is Senate Bill 458. This was a bill passed by the state that requires us, the local jurisdictions, to provide a process for developments that are developed for lots that are developed for middle housing to be further divided in order to essentially create home ownership opportunities for individuals. And so the way it would work is if you have a bare lot today and you want to propose to do like a triplex on it, you would have to come in and show essentially kind of like 2 plans. You'd have to have the one plan that shows that the middle housing you're proposing to put on that lot today, undivided, meets the setback and all the requirements, for a middle housing development on that lot. And then if you meet all the setbacks and the building code requirements, then what the bill requires requires us to allow is that the land division is kind of a much simpler, streamlined thing where there's not a lot of requirements. So if you demonstrate that the middle housing development you're putting on the lot originally and getting approval for meets all the standards, then the division is just, you can essentially put the line anywhere, as long as under the language of the bill, as long as you meet building code requirements and there's necessary easements in place for shared access and parking and, where if you're sharing parking and driveways, so it really, doesn't have a lot of standards for the land division, and it all kind of mainly relies on review of the initial development on the lot to make sure it meets the standards. And then it makes it very easy, then to follow up with the division, then to take that like triplex and put lot lines around the building or through the building in some cases, if you can meet building code requirements, and then have those platted, sold off to individuals as, single, individual units on lots. And the lots may not have frontage, because that's how the bill was crafted. It's very flexible in terms of what you can do on the land division side. Then another set of amendments that are implementing changes to state law is House Bill 3109, and this just makes sure that local jurisdictions are allowing child daycare homes to be in all zones that are residential or commercial, that allow residential or commercial use, and it requires child daycare centers to be allowed in all commercial and industrial zones. So in the amendments, you'll see that there is various zones where we've either added child daycare home or child daycare center as a permitted use to be consistent with the requirements of House Bill 3109. And then finally, the last change to implement state law precludes local jurisdictions from limiting the occupancy of residential dwelling units based on family relationship. So today in our code, we say that in a single family home, you can have it's a single family home, it's a single family dwelling, you can have one family. And so we define family as an unlimited number of people that are related by blood, marriage, all the typical things. And then we allow, if you're not related by blood or marriage or all those things, or adoption or legal guardianship, that you can have up to 5 people, unrelated, living in a dwelling unit. This amendment, gets rid of that, and it says that you can't, regulate how many people can live in a dwelling based on their family relationship. And so we've amended the definition of, family to allow an unlimited number of individuals, living in a dwelling unit, because that is also now a family. So related people or unrelated people, unlimited number of people can live together in a dwelling unit. So it's kind of an issue of fairness and between the two groups. And then, but there still is the building code occupancy. So yeah, it's, even though it's unlimited, you can't like really put in an unlimited number of people stacked in dresser drawers,
It cannot become a party house.
Yeah. So there are still controls, but
Okay.
it does change that. So
Okay. Commissioner Pollock, I think you have your hand raised.
I don't want to go backwards, but I'm going to have to. On the middle housing, I just wanted to say here is that having been on the climate zone change committee, this was one of the great things we wanted to put in the toolbox to help with the middle housing and density. But I also was thinking in the toolbox, and of course this is an operational thing, is how you say expedited land division
yes.
for the middle housing, will there be a designated planner that would had the expertise for this so it could be expedited, or is it just going to be a process that's expedited?
It's a process that's expedited, and it allows two routes. An applicant can choose to go the normal route, but when you look at the table for all the land use applications at 300, or we add this middle housing land division as a new application type, you could either do the expedited process through the ORS, and we would apply that requirement, or you can follow the normal type 2 process for the land division. So the ORS expedited land division process, there's some shorter review periods and shorter timelines given to a decision. And the decision, there's still comment from the public. There's an opportunity to provide review or comments and review an application prior to a decision being issued. One of the big differences is though that the appeal goes to the referee under the ordinance, under the ORS, and the referee can be a local jurisdiction can identify the referee as a hearings officer, if they want. So in this case of Salem, if an expedited land division for a middle housing land division is appealed, that would go to the hearings officer. And then after that, it would be to the Land Use Board of Appeals.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pollock. Any other questions on this section? I think we're ready.
Okay. So another significant change is in order to address the problem that the city is experiencing with people that are that don't have houses or that are houseless, we're proposing to have a new tool in the tool chest to address that. And this is the allowance of managed temporary camping. And let me just say right off the bat, we've been having internal discussions about managed temporary camping. I think we've had some concern, and I've observed it, where people see the word camping and they think it's like kind of just like a free for all and it's not managed. And so we will be changing this to some other. I originally had to use the word shelter, but shelter had some different connotations of having maybe more amenities than you might have in terms of living in tents or the Conestoga huts that are shown in the pictures here. So I just wanted to let you know this is going to change the name to something different, because I think right now by saying camping, I think people have the wrong impression that it's kind of not, it's kind of like what we have today, and then, we see people trespassing on properties and camping in that respect. And that's not what this is at all, but it is a proposed amendment to allow for people that are, that don't have homes to get them off the streets, get them into managed environments in either micro shelters, tents, or vehicles, or some combination thereof, where they can get access to case management, basic hygiene services, garbage collection, waste management, all the typical things to help people get out of that, the lowest level of kind of like despair when you don't have a home and you're on the street. It kind of help to raise people up and maybe break the cycle of homelessness and get them into more stable housing opportunities. And so the key thing about this is that they're managed either by a public government or local government or a religious corporation or a nonprofit that's partnering with a public housing authority or a local government or a church. And they have to have some experience, at least 2 years experience operating an emergency shelter. In terms of where they're allowed, we're proposing to allow them broadly in all zones, including residential zones. But in the residential zones, it's with limitations. So in the residential zone, you can only operate on a property that is that's being operated by a religious assembly use or a church. So the idea would be if a church has space on their property and they would like to, put up maybe 5 or 10 or even more, that's the proposed amendments would allow more tents or Conestoga huts or little micro shelters in their parking lot or on their property. They would be able to do that by going through a proposed, class 1 or class 2 temporary use permit. And the class 1 or class 2 temporary use permit, they both have different procedural requirements with them. The class 1 temporary use permit is a ministerial decision where we just issued the decision without the ability for the public to comment. And then the class 2 temporary use permit is a limited land use decision process where we do provide the typical process like we have for a partition, that we send notice out and people can comment and then the decision can be appealed. You will see in the supplemental staff report you received today, there have been some further changes to the proposed requirements, and this is in light of the comments we received from a representative from Church at the Park, which is one of the city's nonprofit partners who is managing some of these facilities that the city has helped to secure, such as like on Portland and Fairground Road at the old DMV, where we have a mixture of micro shelter pallet houses and RVs. And so they have had a chance to look at the proposed amendments, and they made some observations. Not all of them of which we've made changes to, because some of them would require further discussion to determine if we really want to make that change. But in terms of we have addressed several of the concerns, and they're the folks that are operating these. They're relatively new thing, and so we want to make sure that the folks that are going to be operating these, that the proposed amendments are meeting their demand, and the proposed amendments can allow for them to serve as many people as they can based on the resources that they have available to them. At the same time, not allow so many people that gets out of hand and it becomes an impact on surrounding property owners. So under the comments that we received, there was a desire to increase the maximum number of shelter units on a property to 40. Currently the limit would be 30. And this would be, you could have 40 for any combination of tents, RVs, or micro shelters. We feel that based on their comments, they feel 40 is a reasonable number, and it helps them to, again, maximize the number of people that they can help without it being so many that it will become a detriment, to surrounding property owners and unmanageable. They've indicated that some of the places that they've been at so far, there's not a lot of extra space for off-street parking. The amendments currently require a minimum of 2 spaces, one for the manager and one for any caseworker that might be there. If you have a facility that's over 10 shelter units, there is a requirement to have a caseworker and case management on the property to help, or like medical visits to help the folks as a service. But they have expressed that there really isn't the space for it. And then they also indicate that it's likely that these will be more pedestrian oriented in the future and they don't need off-street parking. And so we tend to agree with that. And so we've proposed to eliminate the off-street parking requirement of 2 spaces and the loading requirement as well. They indicate that they don't have, big delivery vehicles that need to have a 12 by 30 foot loading space on the property. So we've eliminated that. Another concern they had was the current requirements state that if you have over 10 shelter units on the site, so 11 to 40, you would have to have 2 showers on the property. Again, trying to get enhanced services so folks can get back into having dignity and kind of feeling clean and kind of on the road to recovery. But there was a concern that it's not always possible to have the 2 showers on the site, so and if there's a way for them to have access to showers or demonstrate that they can have access to showers, that was much of a better approach they recommended. So we agree that as long as you can either have the showers on site or if you won't be providing them on site, we've proposed to change the amendments to allow them to demonstrate how showers will be provided to the residents in the community. And then there's also a concern that they really don't need a kitchen and food prep area on the site. They didn't have an issue with an area for people to gather to eat, but they indicated that that food prep often occurs offsite and they bring it onto the site, so they don't need to have really kitchen and food prep on the property itself. So we feel that those were reasonable, requests, and then we've further revised the amendments based on those comments we've received.
The questions of Bryce for this section? And while you're thinking about raising your hand, is the paradigm that the individuals are there on a temporary basis until they get their feet underneath them, not that the site is temporary? So Church of the Park can keep their sites going without an end date in mind, correct?
The way the language is currently written is that you come in for the temporary use permit. It's good for a year, and then you can renew annually for 4 years. So you get a total of 5. Now, I would say that, this is new for the city.
Yeah.
There is, between now and 5 years from now, there will be, I'm sure, an ability to revisit this. And if these are successful and they're really helping, then it's very possible that we could easily, morph these over from being a temporary use to something that's a special use that's allowed without having to get the temporary use permit. And you just have to meet these additional standards. So so at this point we haven't, we do intend them to be temporary, albeit with 5 years, 1 year each, and then you can renew as long as, essentially you've been, operating, there have been issues and nothing, the circumstances haven't changed. So you can, again, be up to 5 years. So, but, in recognition that there's enough time, when we'll further evaluate this, that we could very well, just morph them into an allowed use and not a temporary use.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Any other questions for Bryce? Not seeing any, Bryce. I think you're ready to move on.
Okay, so the next set of changes are the changes to the central business district zone. And so we proposed a number of revisions here, and they deal with changes to the uses that are allowed, a few of those, additional development standards that we're adding, some tweaks to the design review standards, and then also adding a brand new use that currently isn't allowed. And so in terms of the changes to the uses, in terms of, becoming more restrictive, today this CB zone allows single family dwellings, detached. That doesn't make sense in the city's central core to allow like a single family subdivision or single family dwellings on a lot in the downtown. So we're proposing to, make single family detached dwellings a prohibited use. We're also proposing to prohibit drive-through uses in the downtown because the real estate and in the area of our downtown is important, and having area within the downtown taking up by queuing lanes for vehicles as opposed to buildings for people, we feel that that's not the best use for properties in the downtown. So we're proposing to eliminate drive-through uses as an allowed use. We're also proposing to change commercial parking, and then based on comments that were received from Commissioner Levine at one of our work sessions, we were originally going to change commercial parking, all of it, whether it was in a surface parking lot or a parking garage, to a conditional use. But we've taken your advice, and it makes sense. We want to just require surface parking lots to be a conditional use. They still could be allowed, but you have to go through the conditional use process. But a parking garage, if there's somebody wants to build a parking garage, or if the city wants to build a parking garage in the downtown, that would still remain as a permitted use. And I will caveat that commercial parking means public parking, not parking that's serving a specific development. It's just like a public parking lot where anybody can park. And then we're adding this self-service storage as a brand new use in the downtown. So currently, we have large buildings that have been sitting vacant based on their size and configuration. It's sometimes difficult to find tenants that will work in those buildings. So we were approached by property owners and real estate agents that were representing property owners. Is there a way to amend the code to provide flexibility in what can be allowed, in these large downtown buildings with a lot of empty space it's hard to find the tenant to go into? And self-service storage is one of those uses that really works for those types of spaces. So we're proposing to allow self-service storage as a special use in the CB zone. Because it's a special use, there are additional standards in 700 that apply to it. The key thing is we don't want the spaces to be self-service storage to occupy the ground floor of the building. So you have these dead storefronts and dead spaces along the street. We still want to have that vibrant sense of interaction and activity and liveliness on the street level. So we only allow half of the building square footage to be occupied by self-service storage. It can be either only in the ground floor or on upper floors. Can't be on the basement rather, and upper floors can't be on the ground floor. And then if you want to go taller, you can and go beyond the 50%, but you have to wrap, the storage area with uses other than storage. And we've had other folks approach us and, express interest in adding floors to existing, large format buildings and having residential uses on the perimeter with a core of storage in the center. And so the idea is that you really don't get the impression that that there's storage in there at all. All the loading and everything occurs in the back from a side street or an alley. And then the ground floor has active uses other than storage. And then above, if you wanted to add on, you could still do that as long as you wrap it with other uses other than storage. So there's several standards in 700 that deal with that. In terms of additional standards to the CB zone in general that we're proposing to establish, one is establishing a minimum residential density of 20 dwelling units per acre, and that would apply purely to developments that are solely residential. It wouldn't apply to mixed-use buildings. We're also introducing a minimum development intensity of an FAR of 2, meaning you have to have essentially a 2-story building that occupies the entire surface area of the lot, and then also along with that a minimum 2-story building height. And then in order to ensure buildings are up to the street and occupying the street frontage, we have a minimum building frontage requirement of 95% along the primary street. And then if you have an intersecting street on a corner lot, you up to 75% of the building needs to be, or the lot needs to be occupied by buildings, along the street. And that's all to encourage, when we have developments in the redevelopment in the downtown, that we're achieving, an urban core level of density within the downtown that's appropriate to the CB zone, and not, having, development of a lesser intensity. So the developments we've seen with, the Nishioka building or the Co's micro apartments at the corner of State and Commercial is a great example. It occupies 100% of the, both street frontages, multi-story building, exceeds the FAR, and then the Homeland Hotel, down the street from there. Those are all examples of kind of the redevelopment, that these development standards are trying to encourage in the downtown. Another thing we're doing is getting rid of a couple overlay zones, the general retail office overlay zone and the Front Street overlay zone. These are overlay zones that only establish additional design review requirements. They don't deal with anything in terms of uses that are allowed or other development standards. It only establishes design review guidelines and design review standards. So we propose to eliminate those 2 overlay zones. And after we eliminate them, we've proposed to take the design review standards from them and then incorporate them into the CB zone, because those 2 zones only generally apply to the CB zone in the core of downtown. They do also apply to the properties that are included with this proposal that we're looking to change the zoning from CO, RH, and CR to CB. This overlay zone does apply to them as well. And so that's one of the reasons why we're doing the zone change or proposing the zone change for those other core area properties that are not zone CB, is because if we get rid of the overlay zone, we have a situation where now you just have these downtown core properties that are zone CO, RH, and CR don't have the benefit of the design review requirements that they currently have, and the zoning of them really doesn't make sense based on their location and the surrounding uses. So, but yeah, we take the design review standards, put them into the CB zone, and then we also add, some additional design review standards into the CB zone that were taken from our mixed use zones along State Street, and that deals with percentage of windows on the upper floor of the building, separation of ground floor dwelling unit entrances from the street to provide a sense of separation from busy streets in the downtown, and then requiring parking to be located beside buildings or behind buildings, not between buildings in the street, and then differentiation of the ground floor of the building from the upper floors, and then a minimum, building floor height of 14 feet to be consistent with what, you typically have in the downtowns with taller ground floor heights, and then, relatively a little bit shorter upper floors. So that wraps up that slide.
Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. So first of all, Bryce, I want to say I think the design review standards for the Central Business District are great. And I want to applaud you for moving those forward. Is it possible for us to, or I guess, is it feasible for us to increase the minimum building height from 2 stories to 3? I think, one of the challenges that we have in downtown is that we have very, very wide streets. That really does make it hard to create that kind of sense of enclosure that you get in a good downtown. And also, it's a better just use of property to be building up. Is Is that possible, or would we?
Yes, no,
be shutting
certainly,
our-
anything is possible at this point, but I would say that, with the FAR of 2, so when you look at that, FAR of 2 means that a lot in the downtown, 100% of it is covered by a 2-story building. So now if you want to have like parking in the back and like you're on a corner lot and you have your 75% frontage on your building frontage on your side street, and you want to have a driveway to get back, to the like a parking lot behind the building in the back, that would automatically force you to go, to raise the building height. So if you have a FAR of 2, you'd have to have a minimum 4-story building that covers half of the lot, or and then every time you have to go up taller. So the FAR of 2 does, I think, depending on the lot, and the size of the lot, an FAR of 2, Nordstrom's building would be an FAR of 2, the JCPenney's building would be an FAR of 2, because again, that's 2-story building occupying the total lot. So if they wanted to cover half of the lot, they'd have to be a 4-story building. So I think the FAR inherently causes buildings to go taller, if they, if, you don't want to fully cover the lot. If you wanted to have, now it wouldn't address a situation where, like, if, somebody wanted to just do a 2-story building in the downtown that covers the entire lot, that would be, that could get away with just 2 stories. But, the likelihood, well, I can't say the likelihood of that, with how the market's changed. That's speculation, but, really, to get that kind of FAR, you'd have like an anchor tenant, large format retailer that would go into it and take it, cover the entire lot with 2.0. I think most of the lots in the downtown, they're probably looking, well, I guess, no, there's a lot of them where they have alley access and they go all the way to the back. But so long story short, it's certainly possible, but I'm just trying to say that the FAR inherently does kind of require, build heights to go up if you're not going to cover the full lot.
Did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Slater?
I think I do. If we were to raise the floor, the minimum building height to 3 stories, do you think, in your experience, that would foreclose a lot of potential development in Salem?
I think it becomes a question of, the applicability of the standard. So if you have a 1-story building and you want to add on to it, if well, we're not going to, if you just want to do an addition to the back, that's going to automatically force adjustments to standards. If the plan isn't, if you want to do a small addition, you want to add on, if you have, I guess, 2-story or even 3 stories, that would be something that would trigger and probably an adjustment, because if you don't plan to build a 2-story building for an existing building and you want to do a small addition to the back, that under the standard today, that would trigger an adjustment. So, and I think, yeah, I don't know. It's hard. It depends on, the owner, the vision, the number of lots that are involved, what the tenant is. But certainly, higher is better in the downtown. But I would probably need maybe to more carefully maybe think, about that. So, and have some more time to think about that.
Thank you. Maybe Commissioner Levin has some thoughts on that as well that you might want to share down the road. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of Bryce on this slide? Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. So next set is amendments to the Fairview mixed use zone. And these amendments are to, simply try to align how we, the way we've applied refinement plans and the relationship to Fairview plans historically, and address, discrepancies and conflicts that have occurred in some different cases that we've had, and essentially it clarifies again the relationship between the Fairview plan and how it impacts and informs future refinement plans. It adds language that clarifying the purpose of the Fairview plan and its regulatory authority over those refinement plans. It makes approval of a refinement plan an actual and amendment to the refinement plan. We had a previous refinement plan for the Woods development at Fairview that it got appealed to LUBA and reversed, and so it exposed issues in terms of how the city has historically interpreted the Fairview plan as it relates to refinement plans, and we're trying to address those issues. Kind of is a simple explanation, and so it makes the Fairview plan more of a general policy guiding document, and it's the actual refinement plans that become the detailed regulatory plans. And it also clarifies that if you want to do develop a property in a refinement plan and you want to deviate from a development standard in a refinement plan, you don't have to do an actual amendment to the refinement plan like you have to do today, or an amendment to the Fairview plan. It's just applying for an adjustment or essentially an adjustment to the standard. So if it's less than 20%, you just ask for a deviation from that standard for that lot, and not have to amend the entire refinement plan. So this set of amendments, we've talked about them before at the work sessions, and it really just tries to clarify and improve the way we, review refinement plans in relation to the Fairview plan, and to address and to align it with how we've approved them in the past for all the other ones that we've, the 4 other ones that are currently approved.
Okay. Any questions for Bryce on this? Seeing none, I think we're ready.
Okay, we already talked about trees.
Mhm.
The amendments also have a series of amendments to our updates to our bike parking standards. So one of them is to increase the minimum bicycle parking requirement for uses in the downtown core and the Central Salem Development Program area, or within a quarter mile of the core network, to 1 space per unit. Today, the minimum bicycle parking requirement for multifamily is the greater of 4 spaces, or 0.1 space per dwelling unit, which is really inadequate when you look at those areas where we're saying you don't have to have any car parking. So if you're in a quarter mile of a transit route or within the downtown core and the CSDP, where you don't have to have vehicle parking, we feel that it's appropriate that, since, there isn't a requirement for car parking, there should be, increased parking requirements for bikes, and those, the introduction of long-term bicycle parking standards that are discussed down here in this row gives flexibility for those spaces to be located in a bike room inside the building or in individual units. And so, for instance, the Nishioka building or the Cozon State Street building at the corner of State Street and Commercial, they had a bike room, and then they also had a bike rack in every one of their dwelling units. So, it's something that, it's kind of a trade-off. No parking for vehicles, more parking for bikes. We've also proposed to increase the bike parking requirement for shopping centers from the existing requirement to 1 space per 5,000 square feet. Again, we've introduced as a new concept in the code long-term bicycle parking, and I would emphasize here that it's not mandated long-term bicycle parking, it's voluntary. So if you want to provide, long-term bicycle parking, in the bicycle parking standards table that establishes the minimum requirements, we establish a percentage of, the required spaces that can be long-term and short-term. And so you can provide as many long-term as you want, but we still want to make sure that, that the developments maintain the minimum number of off-street parking requirements to, for instance, like a retail use, they're going to have a higher, ratio of short-term bicycle parking as opposed to long-term. So we don't want people to just have 100% of their bike parking spaces for a retail use or a restaurant or something in the downtown being, taken up by long-term parking, because long-term parking spaces are further away, they're secure, because they're further away. For short-term uses like restaurants and things where there's a higher turnaround, we want the bike spaces to be closer. And so that's why we have this ratio of, short-term and long-term in the parking standards table, but it's voluntary. You can still, look at the table today and provide all of your spaces short-term if you would like, but if you want to provide long-term as a means to have some additional flexibility and better meet the needs of the users in your building or whatever the case may be, you can have the option to have some long-term. And then there's some standards that we've established now to govern how those should be developed. We've also changed the bicycle parking applicability for changes of the use of existing buildings in the downtown in the CB zone. So, we run into a situation a lot when you have a change of use in an existing building in the CB zone where the buildings are fully, built up to the street. There's sometimes space in the back, off of the alley. But the bicycle parking standards, require the bike spaces to be, within a certain distance of the front of the building. And so if you have an existing building that's takes up the entire lot and you're changing the use from one to another, and that change of use results in more bicycle parking spaces being required, you're in kind of a tough situation because, where are you going to put the bicycle parking spaces? So we proposed to amend the applicability of the bicycle parking standards for existing CB zone buildings in the downtown to say that, whenever you change a use of an existing building and there's more parking spaces required, you just have to demonstrate that there are 8 bicycle racks located in the public right of way of the block face that the building, fronts on, and then so you're able to meet your bicycle parking standards, by bike racks in the public right of way rather than on the property. And then if there aren't enough bicycle spaces along the block face where your building's located, then you have to, get the necessary permit and install them, with Public Works, so we've made that change. And then there's just a series of kind of like reformatting and improvement of putting the standards for space sizes into tables. And there's now there'll be updated graphics that will demonstrate the different types of racks and the dimensions for bike lockers and all sorts of things. So just kind of streamlining and reformatting too.
Great. Any questions for Bryce on this slide? I think we're good.
Okay. And then
This is my favorite one.
Yes, we're expanding, how we allow animals in the city. Currently, we allow ducks and chickens up to 6 for a total. We've had community members express a desire to have a greater variety of poultry being allowed in the city, such as doves and quails. And because the quails, the other birds are like smaller than ducks and chickens and they have smaller eggs, there's a need to have more. And so we've proposed to increase the maximum total number of birds or poultry that are proposed to be allowed to a maximum total of 12. They'd be subject to the same standards that we currently have for keeping of ducks and chickens. And that'd be a total 12 for if you wanted 6 ducks and 2 quails and 3 chickens, it'd be a total combination of 12. And we also, we currently allow the keeping of miniature swine. That's in a different chapter of the code, kind of separated from, the requirements we've begun to locate all the requirements for keeping of animals in chapter 50. So we've moved the keeping of miniature swine from the other chapter 95 into chapter 50, so they can be near the ducks, chickens, and the poultry. And one thing to mention on the poultry, you can't have, large poultry like turkeys or emus or ostriches. It's just, smaller poultry species, quail, doves, pheasants, chickens. Yeah.
Questions of Bryce? Commissioner Pollack.
Okay, so I'm going to reiterate this from the very original time when the chicken stuff came up. I just want to make sure we put on the record that due to the article, 21 of the Oregon Constitution says you shall not impair any contracts, private contracts. And when a homeowners association has a law prohibiting stocks in fowls and things like that, it's more stringent. And because it's more stringent, we're not asking the city to enforce anything. But when the homeowner, it was basically what I did before is there were Supreme Court decisions. And of course, the actual Constitution that says that you cannot make any laws that impair a private contract. And since this section would impair the section of a contract, which is the HOA contract with the homeowner, that this doesn't apply to any homeowners that have a prohibit to this. I just want to make sure I continue to say this because, I want anybody to think that this is just a blanket ordinance. It also, you have to consider your own private property and any homeowner association that you're part of.
Thank you, Commissioner Pollack. That's a good reminder.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on this section? Okay, Bryce, I think we're ready.
Okay, and we're getting close. We're getting close to the end. So, in terms of other, there's a host of other changes, and as indicated by a 390-page document, there were quite a few. We've addressed quite a few things with this package of amendments, and so examples of other changes include eliminating commercial parking as an allowed use in the RA, RS, RM1, RM2, RH, and our ESMU zones. The reason we're doing that is because with the with, residential zone land, being, precious, and, the current code would allow you to have a commercial parking lot, essentially on a lot that's residentially zoned next to a commercial or industrial zone property. So we're proposing to eliminate that because it doesn't make sense in this time where we have a housing shortage that, folks could, take, residential zone lot and put a parking lot there to serve a business. We want to maintain that residential zone land, for housing. And then the Edgewater Street the Edgewater second mixed use corridor zone, SMU zone. We just don't feel in that mixed use corridor zone along Edgewater Street and second that having a commercial parking lot as a permitted use is a great thing. We want to see buildings up to the street, parking behind, and we want to have active use, not just parking lots. So we're proposing to remove it from that zone. We're also making a host of changes to applications and land use procedures. So some examples include clarifying the review procedures and approval criteria for similar use determinations and formal code interpretations under Chapter 400 and Chapter 110. We're proposing to eliminate the property boundary verification process in lieu of just having an alternative better method of just doing property line adjustments or replats to consolidate, lots into one, larger lot. We've added, the transit district to the list of agencies that are required to receive notice of all type 2, 3, and 4 land use applications, as well as legislative land use proposals as you're discussing this evening. And then we have a new requirement for a landscaping permit that would apply in those situations where where a building permit isn't otherwise required. So if you're like paving, a section of your lot and you have to have landscaping requirements for the new paved area, but it doesn't require a building permit, this landscaping permit, is the mechanism. So we can track, once you get your site plan review for the paving of your park, portion of your parking lot or a new parking lot, we have a method to, to review the landscaping plans, for that site plan review and then do inspections following, the permit approval. And then we're also updating and clarifying development standards, and examples of those changes include clarifying the applicability of pedestrian access standards, for certain situations and developments scenarios. Also, we're requiring transit stops to be constructed with development. And we're adding transit stops as an essential element of a street. So, street lights, landscape strips, sidewalks, transit facilities and transit stops are now part of that list of the components of a street. And then we're also proposing to require alley access, for any new dwellings on existing lots that abut an alley.
Questions of Bryce? Okay, I think we're finished with that slide.
Okay, then the last slide here, second to last, is the legislative zone change that's included with this proposal. So on the left, you see the existing comprehensive plan designation, or the comp plan map with the comprehensive plan designations. And so they're all designated CB, which stands for Central Business District. So you have the green, which is the capital, community service government, where the Capitol Mall is and county offices are. And then the rest of the downtown core to the west, and then even to the south, separated by the public land, is Central Business District. When you look at the zoning map on the right, you see that generally the majority of the downtown core, south of Union and south of State Street, down to Trade Street, is Central Business District, except there's a small, section of land that's zoned residential or multifamily high-rise residential RH, one parcel that's commercial office, and then the rest that are commercial retail. So the legislative zone change that's included with this proposal changes the RH, CO, and CR zoning to Central Business District to match the rest of the downtown core properties to the west. And again, it also allows us to maintain design review requirements on these properties, because these are today the ones that are highlighted, with the bold, outline here. Those are within the general retail office overlay zone that has the design review standards that apply to the rest of the downtown properties. So we're getting rid of the general retail office overlay zone and incorporating those standards into the CB zone. And so, one, we want to make sure that, these properties are maintain, the same design review requirements, and the CB zone allows for a greater, variety of uses than what you would see in the RH, CO, and CR. in terms of housing, multifamily is a conditional use in the CR zone. It's an outright permitted use in the CB zone, so it makes improvements there. So it's more flexible in terms of uses. There will be some additional development standards that will be different. But I will say too, the existing development standards, in the CR zone and the RH and the CO, they conflict with the requirements of the general retail office overlay zone. And we've had circumstances where if somebody comes in for development in the CR zone has a minimum building setback of 5 feet, from the street, but the general retail office overlay zone requires buildings to be set back to the property line. So that is forced applicants in the past to have to ask for an adjustment to reduce the minimum 5-foot setback of the CR zone to 0 to match what the overlay zone otherwise requires buildings to have, which is 0 setback up to the street. And based on in the staff report, the proposed the sites in this area that are proposed to be changed are all served by an existing transportation network of major arterials and local streets and collector streets. And because we're changing because we're only changing the zoning and not the comprehensive plan designation, there are no impacts to the transportation system and no issues for compliance with Goal 12 transportation. It provides, the same, level of housing in terms of Goal 10 and it impacts on housing. It provides the same, mix of housing that would be allowed in the, the CO and the RH zone today, an unlimited number. And in the CR, it makes it better by making, housing a permitted use as opposed to a conditional use.
Great.
So with that, we would, oops.
Any questions on the zone changes? I think you're good, Bryce, go ahead.
Okay, so with that, I will conclude my presentation, and we would recommend that that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council accept first reading of an ordinance bill to amend the UDC and change the zoning of those downtown properties to CB Central Business District.
Okay, and we will have another opportunity to ask questions of Bryce, but let's go to the folks that have signed up to testify. First, we have Mr. Anderson representing the Neighborhood Association. So for the record, state your name and address for the record, please. And as a spokesperson for the Neighborhood Association, you do have 10 minutes if you'd like.
Okay. The host has stopped me from sharing the video, so we'll deal with that. I'm going to share my screen before we start. Okay, so you can see the first screen here.
Nope.
Let's go back. Let's see. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can see you. We just can't see your shared screen.
All right. Well, I'm being shut out from the video for some reason. So let's just, all right. So it says share. So
now
it says,
it is. Now
all
it
right.
is.
All right. Can see the slides here, right?
Got it. Got till 7:27.
All right. So Steve Anderson, West Salem Neighborhood Association Land Use Chair, Co-Chair Edgewater Partners, 3240 Gellar Road, Northwest in Salem. So what you're looking at here today is, first off, we want to note appreciation for Bryce's hard work and staff. And we have a few comments and issues relative to the recommendation to adopt and recommend. There's a couple of the recommend issues that we are going to take exception with. As far as the tree ordinance, we've discussed that. We've looked at that, and the additional requirements for tree protection has come up across many fronts, but the explanation by Bryce tonight is satisfying to all people. And we believe that there's plenty of room there to avoid unintended consequences, allow for acceptable variances. And so we recommend that that be approved. Under the Unified Development Code, Chapter 35, Edgewater 2nd Street mixed use, we agree with the explanation to eliminate the commercial parking for the same reasons that Bryce talked about: building frontage, parking in the back. The requirements in that zone that we worked out with city planners to have a pedestrian-friendly, walkable neighborhood. The managed temporary camp provision is not acceptable for that zone, and we ask that that be removed. It does not fit and it does not comply with the current ESUM zone. So we ask that that one be removed. As far as Chapter 880 development standards, there's a couple issues. Quickly, setbacks. There's a table in there, and then table 510, and then section 112 where there are setbacks, and the tables that are not setbacks. We ask that that be resolved as to which was correct, setbacks or no setbacks. That's confusing, okay? And issue number 2, Bryce testified before the Planning Commission, particularly riparian corridors and other issues. The city is not in compliance with Goal 5. That's why the commissioner's current proposal, and we support that proposal. The word riparian, though, however, in the codes, UDCs has 4 different definitions. In fact, Bryce misstated that twice tonight in his testimony, where he substituted waterways for riparian corridors and riparian corridors for waterway. We request that that be clarified in the UDCs because it's across multiple UDCs and does make this acceptance of these UDC corrections impractical and unacceptable. In addition, this is the goal protection proceedings under the provisions of LCDC staff to their commissioners on the October 29th and November 9th meetings, where they talked about these Goal 5 provisions have to have revisions that intend on preventing additional development per the near sensitive resources. What that means is Councillor Pollock asked the question, 100-foot setback. That is a requirement specifically in the law or in the rule House bill, because the city does not comply with riparian corridor requirements of OAR 660-090. And so until that happens, that has to be the case. In addition, there is what was in the current proposal UDCs is waterways. Waterways was not in the House bill. It was riparian corridor specifically. That inconsistency needs to be corrected before going to City Council. Waterways is a city definition specific to the city of Salem, and it does not comply with the requirements of waters of the states, Oregon definitions of streams, and definition of riparian corridors. There's a huge mess there. So in addition, cities must adopt land use regulations to protect water quality, aquatic habitat. That 100-foot setback says nothing about protection within that 100-foot setback. The tree ordinance does not address that. And in fact, Bryce testified to you before that that ordinance does not satisfy the state goals. This whole area of riparian corridors, setbacks, and protection of the Goal 5 resources means that this has to be cleaned up before this can go forward. The House bill says specifically there's a requirement that these must be met, and they're not met. In addition, there's under the definitions section of Chapter 111, there are 5 definitions of Salem Revised Code for waterways, and those are the sections they are in. I've provided this for you. In addition, there are 33 references to waterways. This causes confusion, and it does not implement the state definition of waters of the state and the riparian corridor rules. So there's a disconnect here in terms of when the city uses waterways, this is not in state law. It is not in the state rules, and it's not providing the protection under state requirements. So this needs to be corrected before this goes to City Council. So I'll leave it there in terms of overall, the Neighborhood Association appreciates the work of staff. We're excited about what they've done, the provisions here, but the ESU zone in Edgewater, that provision needs to be redone. And before this is moved forward, that waterway word needs to be pulled from the UDC. It is nowhere in the definition in the House bill, and the multiple definitions within the current UDCs makes that inoperable, and it does not protect the Goal 5 resources as currently stated. So I'll leave it there. Our request is that you hold this back until the time that staff can address those inconsistencies and those rule definition issues. Other than that, there's a general acceptance for what's before you. And I'll just say that I will speak as an expert if Josh wants to query me on that, because he has a prejudice towards experts. I'm willing to offer 40 years of expertise and 4 advanced degrees. So thank you.
Mr. Anderson. Questions from the commissioners for Mr. Anderson? I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Oh, I do. Commissioner Pollock has her hand raised. You're not quite off the hook yet, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, can you go back to your, you had a, oh my goodness, it's not the waterways conflict. It was something else. It was for that.
Natural resources pursuant to 66050.
No, keep going. There's one year. Keep going.
There, the riparian area has 4 applications in the UDCs.
No, in the first issue.
Okay, issue number 1. Okay, setbacks.
Yes, the setbacks issue. You're saying, okay, so I know that they're saying no setbacks for single family, but then there are setbacks regarding like garage, front, street front and side. So what you're saying is that there's confusion with that?
There says that there are no setbacks in the table for family dwellings in relationship to waterways. Yet section 112.505 says there are setbacks. And so that's not clarified specifically. And we think that just a couple of changes in definitions or clarification there would help.
We get back to questions of staff, Commissioner Pollock. We can ask Bryce about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. Anderson? Seeing none, thank you for your time, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I have 8 individuals signed up for testimony. You each have 5 minutes. And when I call your name, could you repeat your name and address for the record? Mr. Erdman.
Thank you. I tested earlier. I don't know, can you see me on screen? My camera was not working a moment ago. Good. Wonderful, thanks. Mike Erdman with the Home Builders Association of Marion and Polk Counties, 2075 Madrona Avenue Southeast here in Salem. We have got significant concerns about many of the proposed changes to the tree code that really are in kind of direct conflict with the city's goals of trying to achieve greater density. It's the requirement for that protective fence around the root zone that we find so problematic. I think you're all aware of the zoning subcommittee's efforts and the future code change that will be brought to you, looking at a minimum density of 5.5 units per acre. And that, of course, stems from the comp plan revisions and the climate action plan. And that's going to end up requiring much smaller lots in the future with a lot less room to incorporate trees and the protected root zones. And so on those really small lots that are going to soon be a requirement in the city, there just isn't that much space around the home, and the building footprint is going to fill most of that lot. And if you've got a 20-inch fir, for example, in the backyard, once you put that 40-foot diameter protective fence around it, in many cases, you'll have lost the ability to effectively put a home on that lot. And, are there cities that have similar requirements for that fencing? Absolutely. But what they don't have is this minimum density requirement where we're going to have such small lots. And that is where we have the conflicting goal of the tree preservation and the tight single family densities. We're also concerned about the Doug firs over 30-inch, including those as significant trees. I think it's fairly widely known that Doug firs are a lot more likely to come down after trees around them have been thinned. And that creates, I think, a true safety hazard that needs to be addressed. So here's what we'd suggest, 2 things. Number 1, eliminate Doug firs over 30 inches from the definition of significant trees due to safety concerns. And then 2, we would suggest that you eliminate the root zone protective fencing requirements on the non-significant trees. And I'm not going to disagree that fencing provides better protection for the trees, but I think we've got to find that middle ground that balances these competing goals of density and tree preservation. And frankly, without this change, and as Chair Griggs alluded to earlier in the meeting, what you're really doing is incentivizing developers to remove the largest non-significant trees they can, because of course, the larger the tree, the larger that protected area, and that's a larger area that they've got to work around trying to site homes on the site. And so those are the 2 things we would suggest: A, eliminating Doug firs from significant trees, and B, eliminating the fencing requirements on the non-significant trees. And really, and I'm not exaggerating here, I think if the tree code passes without changes, you're going to end up with a significant number of sites inside the UGB that simply won't be developed. And all that does, it's going to make our existing housing supply problem even worse. And we're going to end up with greater affordability challenges. We're going to push development more and more so outside of Salem into surrounding communities where buyers commute back into Salem for employment. And of course, that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and flies in the face of the Climate Action Plan, which is driving much of this. And I think we've got to be concerned about affordability. You know, there are 236 MSAs in the country. And when you look at affordability, when you measure income to house pricing, Salem currently ranks 205th of 236. And it wasn't that many years ago that we were in the mid 80s, and our affordability is slipping away. And much of that is the regulatory environment. We're going to end up like Corvallis, unfortunately, if this goes this direction. In Corvallis, which is the least affordable market in the entire country, they don't build much because the regulatory environment is so difficult to deal with. And so the housing is outside of Corvallis, and folks go to Brownsville, they go to Adair Village, they go to Lebanon and commute in. And that's what we're seeing more and more of here in Salem as it gets more expensive to develop. And we're looking at lots right now in Salem, typical single family lots that are selling for the $160,000 to $170,000. It's this type of environment that contributes to the cost of development. We've got to strike that balance. We've got to find that middle ground somewhere. So I appreciate your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Slater has his hand raised.
Thank you. So, Mike, I appreciate the point, and I think we've discussed this about the safety issues related to Doug firs in a construction environment. I think I mentioned to you that I've been on sites with clients and looked at Doug firs and have recommended that they be removed because they're no longer safe. And arborists have come along behind me and substantiated that. I guess when the time's appropriate, and perhaps Chair Griggs can tell me now if that's now, we can ask the staff if they have some thoughts about that proposal. Do we want to wait for after, or can we take that now?
We'll wait for after. We'll go through the
after.
public
Okay.
testimony and then
Okay.
save that question. It's a good
Thank you.
question.
Okay, so the second question that I have, it's more a comment. The trees that have construction around their root zones typically fail, and they typically fail years down the road. So homeowners become confused as to what happened, and they may not recognize that their tree was damaged or their roots compressed years ago during the construction process. So I'm very committed to seeing that protection zone put in place, but I also recognize the flexibility issue. So I'm wondering, why is the variance issue, or why can't that be addressed in the tree permitting removal? I would rather have a tree removed than have the fencing taken in a way that's going to damage that tree over the long haul. Are you feeling that the current permitting process simply would not allow that?
Yeah, and maybe we can have Mark Grenz address that when he speaks, but I think the issue is when we start getting into those discretionary calls, then we get away from the protection of the needed housing statutes, and no longer do we get clear and objective standards. And so that becomes very problematic for developers trying to get through the process, because once you get to that point, then it's much more likely your development process is going to get drug out and could last, a significant amount of time and add a whole lot more cost. So that, I think, is the concern with going to that more discretionary process.
Did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Slater?
I don't. I will just note that in the arboriculture world, Corvallis is considered a national leader. And I'll leave you with that thought.
And I would just say again, it is the least affordable housing market in the country, 236 of 236.
I did hear that too.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Erdman, for your time.
Thank you.
Next, we've got Ken Beerley. If you would restate your name and address again for the record, and you also have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. For the record, Ken Beerley, Chair of the Glen Gibson Creek Watershed Council. What I want to talk about, I did submit some written materials, and it's really following on Mr. Erdman's comments about clear and objective standards, and it has to do with the definition of waterways. Waterways are basically determined by the Public Works Director. So there is no objective standard by which you could determine what a waterway is. At the very least, and this is a consideration that applies to riparian corridors, which are defined as in section 111.001 of the code, and they're connected to waterways, and waterways are defined as streams that are designated by the director. There is no process, there is no uniform standard by which someone could determine how a waterway was determined to be a waterway by the director of the Public Works Department. So I think that in future revisions of the code, that issue needs to be resolved, because given an arbitrary standard like that, you could have very different applications throughout the city. There's no way for the public to know how it was determined, what criteria were used, what standards were used. So I hope that that becomes an issue that is worked on in the future. And with that, thank you. I'd be glad to take questions, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Beerley. Questions of Mr. Beerley? I think you're off the hook, Commissioner Beerley. Let's see, next is Mr. Grins. Again, name and address for the record, 5 minutes.
Stuff here. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mark Grins, and I'm with Multitech Engineering. Our office is at 1155 13th Street Southeast. And I'm gonna hopefully have permission to share screen here, and I'm gonna try to follow up a little bit on what Mike was talking about. So I think that and I don't know if Mike made the point, but I think the development committee is in step with trying to find a way to save as many trees as they can in these projects. And I think that it's achievable to some degree, but I do want to point out that adding trees other than oak trees to the list of significant trees will create some problems on how development on different properties can occur, as well as shrinking the diameter of an oak tree that's considered significant. So I have here just that this is a project. Don't worry about the X's or not X's, but this is just a project that we have in town that we completed. But I've zoomed in on this area right here, and so there are in this between in lot 7, 8, 9, and 10 that are in here. If we start adding non-oak trees or smaller than 24-inch oak trees to the list and put those the root zone protection areas out in this area, then I have a 38-inch pine, of 20-inch oak, 24-inch oak, a 38-inch fir, a 32-inch fir, a 22-inch oak, a 36-inch fir, a 20-inch oak. So what will happen is that by the time, and these lots are only like 60 feet in width, so by the time you start putting those root protection zones in there that the code sets out, you can pretty much establish that there is no place to put a house on lot 7, 8, 9, and part of 10. Now that may be determined to be that's the way it is, and that's worth it to save the trees. But when you roll in the density increases that Mike pointed out, that is also being worked through the process right now, and start trying to figure out how you're going to achieve those densities and still have these type of preservations. This project has a density today with these 6,000 square foot lots of about 4.5 lots per acre. And if I have to give up these lots, and then the situation exists in another portion of the project where I have the same type of thing that happens, maybe I can reconfigure those lots, but I lose a lot in there, I start dropping down to 4 lots per acre, or maybe even slightly less before it's all said and done. And you got existing utility easements that are coming through. You have street connections that you have to achieve and street connections to make in the future. You start throwing all that together and it becomes difficult to recoup those spaces and to help increase that density. So density is going to be hard to achieve with the tree ordinance changes that are coming if they're not considered simultaneously, at least in some respects. I'm going to show you one more and then I'll get out of here. This is a project that doesn't exist yet. It looks like this. We're trying, and you can see the topography that we're fighting in here, to try to find a way to get street connections in to tie into existing streets that are around here and still achieve kind of density. Now the lot configurations are they're just there for evaluation right now. But you can see this site's pretty steep. So in order to develop this site, I have to figure out a way to get a street up that meets the city's design standards. I have to provide pedestrian accessibility across intersections that's 5% or less there. So I'm fighting topography to make this happen. And then you throw into this thing trees. Now this is one section of it. Now I had my staff, my survey staff, when we tied the trees down on this site, I had my survey staff actually try to establish what would be the true drip line based on the tree canopy that's there on many of those trees. And so that's what these circles represent. And in some cases you have a 16-inch oak, but has a fairly large drip line, and other places you have trees that are large diameter, but the drip line is small. But that was an attempt to try to identify as we move forward, just exactly what the drip lines are, so that as we started to try to provide tree protection in here, as the current code requires, we still have to protect those trees as the ones we're going to save. That we have
you're out of time, unfortunately.
Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to try to point out some examples of where we're trying to find ways to do it.
Let's see if we've got any questions for you from commissioners, and
I'm going to unshare if I can.
Okay. You're better at that than I am. Any questions for Mr. Grins and Miss Commissioner Pollock?
So on the, if you can, okay, so on the last slide that you showed us and all those drip lines, but technically some of those trees would be scheduled for removal, correct?
That's certainly true. They would. I think that what I was trying to have my staff tell us was that when we start trying to save 25% trees, which now you're proposing to move to 30% of the trees on here, and this site in total has like 449 trees on it, so it's a lot of trees. So when you start saying 30% of that, you're talking about saving 100 and some trees. So you got to find a place to do that. You find a way to do it and create protection for the root zones around those trees that you're going to save. And then you still have to figure out a way to grade this site in order to provide a way to get access for the streets themselves and to get access to the lots so that they're usable when they're all said and done. And now with the tree preservation, where you're talking about making sure that we even go further to make sure that the building envelope that would be created on these lots is not going to infringe upon that trees, the root zone in the future either. So it becomes much, much harder to make the choices of which trees to save and how to achieve it. And I think that what everybody is thinking is that you're going to find developers that are going to remove those larger trees in order to reduce that area of impact and try to find a way to get houses to fit on there.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Pott, you're good on that?
I'm fine.
Any other questions for Mr. Grins? I don't see any other questions for you. Thank you
very much.
Testifying, you bet. Next up, we have Mr. Fry, followed by, just in case you're wanting to step away and get a cup of coffee, followed by Mr. Olson, Mr. Bratland, Mr. Moore, and Mr. Manville, just so you know where you are in that lineup. Mr. Fry, name and address for the record, and welcome back.
Thank you. Rich Fry. The address is 777 Sahalee Drive Southeast. Many of you know me, former planning commissioner. I presently sit on the Manufactured Structures Board for the state. We create state code for the building departments. And I just wanted to bring to your attention that with the tree ordinance and the minimum density that's being proposed by the city, and the state is pressing very hard for solar to be mandated for residential. And as we all know, trees and solar don't really go together, unfortunately. And with the minimum density, we're actually getting into an area where most of the properties that are left in Salem are on hillsides and valleys, that kind of stuff, are going to become unbuildable. I am also a developer. I just finished a development in Sublimity, and I left about 45 or 50 trees on the lots, and sold those lots to a builder, and he did pre-solds. And in every case, the homeowners that wanted to buy the houses on those lots required him to take down the trees before they would buy the lot and have a house built on it, because they were very, very tall firs. They were, older trees that had been in this grove forever. And once those are thinned out with the small root balls, they're very dangerous. And the people just said, no, we're not interested in that lot because of those trees. And in reality, every tree was cut down and removed. So I heard someone say earlier that it's more valuable to have trees on your property. And I would agree that if you've got an existing home that has a big oak tree in your backyard, that's probably true. But if you have a fir tree or something like that, that's 90 feet tall, that people are not interested in having those in their backyard, especially after the ice storm and everything that we just had. I think that with the density of 5.5 per acre, I'm a developer. I do 4.5 units per acre, lots per acre, and they're telling us we have to do 5.5, plus we have to save the trees. I see this becoming a moratorium on building, and I think that what you're going to do is force everybody to the outlying communities. And my last 2 subdivisions have been out of Salem, Turner and Sublimity, and they sold like hotcakes. And we're talking about affordability. The city is also proposing, not tonight, but they're going to propose mandatory middle housing in your subdivisions. And I just don't see how you do that on these small lots. So that's just my comment. And I think many of you know me, I'm not crying wolf. This is something that I see as being very important for the city. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. Questions for Mr. Fry? It's a chance for all you old commissioners to give him a hard time, but
I know it's
tempting.
payback, I guess.
Very tempting. Thank you. Next up, we have.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Commissioner Pollock. I did not see your hand raised.
I wouldn't expect any less, Josh.
Yeah, I know. So you would support what the home builders had put forward of eliminating Douglas fir from the code?
I would absolutely.
Okay.
And the way that I understand the proposal is it's all the significant trees. So oaks, 20 inches or larger, all other trees, 30 inches or larger, plus 30% of the other trees is, and Bryce, you can clarify that if I'm wrong on that, but that was my understanding from our meetings before.
We can ask for clarification for that, Pollock.
It is a significant amount of trees that we're talking about. And when you get down to a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot lot, I mean, you're going to have a garage and a kitchen and a living room, and then all your living space is going to be above that. And in today's market, people don't want 2-story houses because you're not going to have any room for a footprint for your house.
So my understanding from your statement is that you would like the significant trees and the 30-inch and larger to be included in the 30% if it's raised to 30%.
If they're going to make other trees other than oak significant trees, the only way I can see it working is for that to be part of the 30%.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Slater, you have a question for Mr. Fry?
Yeah, perhaps I heard you wrong, but did you say that people are not interested in 2-story houses?
In my, what I'm finding in the homes that we're building, and I've done about 300 lots in the last few years. Most people in this area are looking for single family, unless they're young folks that have kids or something like that, then they don't mind having the 2-story. But with the prices today, what we're finding is most of the people that are buying homes in our subdivisions prefer the 1-level homes.
May I ask a follow-up here?
Sure.
Sure thing.
Thanks. Do you think that providing everybody with a single-story house is even a sustainable option in our current environment? I mean, don't you think we're getting to the point where one house stretched across the maximum amount of lot size to keep it to 1 floor is kind of a luxury we can no longer afford?
I don't know. That's not what the market says, and that's not what we're seeing. Yeah, I mean, that's why we build apartments, is for the people that want a smaller footprint. And I believe that with the state passing the middle housing, I think that that's a great way to do things in Salem that will give people the ability to buy their own home with a smaller footprint. But the state says you may put middle housing in any subdivision. The city is going to say you have to put middle housing in any subdivision. And once they do that and require this density, now you've taken an acre of land and you're putting many more houses on it. And I agree that that's good for cost. But when we have the street ordinance, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, now we don't have the ability to put that many units on an acre and save the trees and have solar and do the rest of that. So I just think it all has to be taken into context together, not separately. Here's the tree ordinance, now here's the density ordinance, and here's the solar over here. If we look at it all at the same time, we get a better understanding of what's practical. You know, if we didn't have setbacks, if we didn't have all the rest of that, we could put as many houses as we want on these lots. But when you have, you know, a 20-foot setback in your backyard, if you're 2-story, you have 12 feet in the front, 20 feet in the front of your garage, 5 feet on either side on a 4,000 square foot lot, there's nothing left.
Is there a follow-up, Commissioner Slater?
No.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Fry? Thank you.
Thank you, President Griggs, and good seeing you guys again.
Good to see you. Mr. Olson, name and address for the record, and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, Eric Olson, Olson Design Development, Olson Communities, developer in Salem and Monmouth primarily, and sort of spent a day or so going through the entire recommended revisions to the code, and just have some comments. I think, you know, it's a difficult process to go through, I think, in general, with until you're actually in the trenches making design decisions and trying to figure out how to deliver something that's very I'm sorry, let me get my video going. Sorry about that. There we go. It's going to be usable and marketable to our buyers here in the area. So I've always been a relatively creative, sort of outside the box developer, you know, emphasizing sustainability and livability. And so based on sort of my 25 years of experience in development, I sort of wanted to bring up some things that I think are deeply problematic in this. And I think there are solutions to the problems. And so I just wanted to sort of quickly summarize those. Can I share my screen here? Can you see that?
Yep, we can see it now.
Okay, so the first thing Bryce mentioned just a little bit ago about requiring alley access for new single-family homes if there's an existing alley in place. I think that's it's a little bit in conflict with a couple things. Both we use this is an example of a house in Fairview Addition where we've built 2 single-family homes on a single lot. One is one of the houses is access from the alley, and one's access from the street. We've put a single car garage on the front side because we sort of are big into de-emphasizing the garage. But for topography and for an ability to create density, I think this requirement is ill-advised. And I think I would highly recommend that staff looks at ways that we might be able to mitigate it. If we're trying to get 3 or 4 family homes on a lot and there's an alley, to say that we have to get all the cars into that property via an alley, I think could be potentially problematic. So that's my first area of concern, that we at a minimum allow for a single car garage to be permitted access from the street side if there's an existing alley on a new residence. I am also the developer of the Fairmont Cottages up on Rural. And I'm a big believer in cottage clusters. I think they're a fantastic way that we have when we have challenging pieces of property, how we can handle creatively coming up with a living situation and create great density. If any of you guys are who might not be aware of what this is, it's essentially has a density of about I'd say it's a density of about 10 units to the acre. This is an acre and a half. We have 14 houses on the property plus a community building. But this would not be allowed in the cottage cluster code as defined, as currently defined with the various revisions that are being made. And part of the problem is the fact that it doesn't allow for fee simple lots as part of that. And I think to have fee simple lots in terms of the marketplace, each one of these is 14 individual lots with an alley that basically goes around the perimeter and a common space here in the middle. I think that's one big problem. Also, I think the requirement of smaller footprints. We have great density. We have 10 units to the acre, and the density is there, and we're not sort of mandating a 900 square foot footprint, which I think limits significantly what you can do and how you're going to be able to make the project marketable. So,
you have one more minute, Mr. Olson. Just so
okay. I'll jump. Okay, so that's that. And I've sent this all as written testimony that can be reviewed. I'll skip that one because that's not critical. The other big one I want to point out is back to the tree preservation. Here's an example of 4 lots, 4,000 square foot lots with tiny houses on them, 1,200 square foot lots, 1,200 square foot homes, and just maybe 6 trees on the development. And the important point to note here is that the shaded trees here, while they would normally in my development be maintained, they would need to be cut down. I would have to cut them down because I wouldn't be able to necessarily protect the tree zone, the root zone. And so by creating this new requirement, we're actually going to put developers in a position where they're going to, like me, they're going to cut down trees that they otherwise wouldn't. And I just think that's a real concern for the sort of, and I think it is not really the intent of what staff was expecting. And so I think somehow that needs to be dealt with. So I think we really need to get rid of the critical root zone requirement. And I think it's very important that we have that we look at existing tree conservation plans and make sure that, as Bryce said, that legal counsel had already said that significant trees will not include the new significant trees, but that we also don't have the critical zone requirements for all trees in existing tree plans that have been already approved, which I already have approved in my Fairview edition.
I think your time is up.
Okay.
I do have a question for you, Mr. Olson.
Sure.
Mr. Urban mentioned his suggestion of eliminating the protection of the critical root zone for non-significant trees. Would that go a long way into help and to alleviating your concerns, or is that not enough?
It would go a long ways. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Commissioner Slater, you have a question?
Yeah. So Mr. Olson, do you believe that if you remove the critical root zone and you do construction grading around the root zone, that tree is going to survive for 5, 10, 15 years? I mean, in other words, do you believe that there's no value in the critical root zone, so we just shouldn't use it? I mean, I'm just confused. If you want to save the tree, what's the concern with the critical root zone?
Well, no, I'm just saying the fact is that the trees will be cut down because there's no way. I mean, in terms of the amount of disturbance that happens when you develop property, we simply will just cut them down now. So yeah, that's a decision that would need to be made. If it's better to cut them down now and rather than preserving as many as we can with the hopes that they'll be preserved down the road, then that's a decision that I guess the city would need to make.
If I may.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is why you would consider construction around the critical root zone of a tree as preservation, that it doesn't preserve the tree. It will eventually fail, most likely. So you're not in fact preserving it.
I'm not an arborist. I can't really respond to that. I can't imagine that all trees are going to die if you disturb the root zone. I mean, we have many subdivisions around the city where trees, I would imagine, have made it through pretty significant construction. But maybe that's not the case. I'm just bringing up the point. I think it's just important that the information's out there that more trees are going to get cut in certain circumstances than otherwise would if we have this rather tough requirement as far as protecting the root zone.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Olson? I do love that. I used to live in Fairmont, and that subdivision, that infield area is just a beautiful example of cottage clusters. You did a fabulous job. I've never met you before, but kudos to you on that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mr. Brotland, followed by Mr. Moore and Mr. Manville.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. And name and address for the record, please.
Greg Bratland, 5494 Red Leaf Drive South in Salem. I'm just coming on tonight after a scout meeting. I want to talk to you a little bit about the chicken request. We've been raising chickens ever since COVID started to try to be self-sufficient as a family. I've got 6 children, so we have a large family, and the current number max at 6 is just kind of a hindrance to wanting to be able to do that because we use everything from the chickens in our family, the eggs, the shells in their garden. We use the bedding as fertilizer for our gardens. We take excellent care of our chickens, and we contain their food and their bedding in airtight sealed containers. We're very responsible, keep a very beautiful backyard. We're asking to have that increased to 12 for the city. I know a lot of homeowners that would really love to be able to have more. And there's a lot of us that are very responsible that would be able to benefit from that greatly. And I think that, people that can maintain that, I know I've heard in the past there was an issue with people not properly storing feed. But honestly, I don't think that's going to be the majority of the people that you're going to have an issue with, because you can store it in an airtight plastic container or metal barrel or whatever it is you want to do, and it's not an issue. And it's not like you're having a hoard of it to where it's going to spill everywhere. We're talking filling up like auto feeders and stuff inside of chicken runs. And as long as you maintain it, there's nothing to be concerned about.
Thank you, Mr. Brotland. Questions for Mr. Brotland? Thank you for sticking with us. That was a long time you had to wait.
Thank you for hearing me. I had a scout meeting, so I appreciate you letting me speak.
You betcha. You take care. Mr. Moore, name and address for the record, 5 minutes.
Hello, name is Jacob Moore. Address is 2226 Hyde Street, Salem, Oregon. And I'm here to talk about SRC Chapter 50 revisions here for birds being kept. Specifically, I've been talking for quite some time now about getting quail allowed as well as other small birds. A lot of the reason for that is that there is a drastic reduction in feed when we're talking about small birds versus chickens. In particular, most quail are about 20 to 30 grams of feed versus ducks that are currently allowed, which I keep, but around 170 to 200 grams worth of feed. So one of the concerns I have is we're talking about a much smaller bird, much smaller eggs, and then we're talking about a lot less feed, but we're still at the same limit of currently 6 birds, hopefully soon 12 birds. Math doesn't exactly work out on that one. As well as I also have some concerns about the rules for keeping them. Currently, we would have to follow, for quail, we would have to have the same standards for chickens and ducks, which is problematic in several ways. The biggest one is that currently for chickens, and ducks, we're supposed to have 6 square feet per bird. A lot of standard quail habitats are about 1 to 2 square feet per bird. And again, we are talking about a 3-ounce bird here by comparison, so this is a much, much smaller critter. And the second thing is that in a lot of cases with small birds, there should be an additional requirement as far as housing for them. Currently, we have separate houses and runs defined for chickens and ducks. For quail and a lot of other small birds, that's often a shared space because they either can still fly due to that size, or they're much more prone to having predators, and so they need to be in an enclosure of some kind. So it looks like that is currently overlooked. As far as concerns with a greater number, I've heard feed is the number one problem, is contributing pests, or contributing to the pest problem here in Salem. Again, if we're talking about birds that have to be in an enclosure that's going to hold a 3-ounce bird, that needs to be mouse and rat proof. At the same time, if feed is required to be in a sealed container, that would reduce that problem as well. And so not allowing these smaller birds is definitely going to cause problems. And then I think the housing requirements just need to be reviewed on this before it's finally passed. But otherwise, I'm in full support of adding small birds to be allowed in Salem.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Questions of Mr. Moore? Not seeing any. Thank you for your time and sticking with us. Mr. Manville, name and address for the record, and you also have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Evan Manville, 345 LaFell Street South. Appreciate your dedication and your time and the staff's work on the UDC update. I am coming to comment on the parking requirements. We, as many people have noted, we're working on housing costs. We're struggling with the climate crisis. We're trying to make traditional missing middle housing types pencil out, and we're trying to protect trees. And there's something that can help all 4 of those things, and that's to reduce how much parking we mandate on all of our lots for new development. So I would encourage you to look at the parking tables, and I submitted written testimony earlier today, and to think about following the city of Bend's lead when it comes to what they're requiring in the House Bill 2001 middle housing types. They recently passed their House Bill 2001 update, and they're not requiring any parking for 2-family and 3-family and cottage clusters, and they're only requiring 1 space for quadplex development, not 1 per unit. In most of their zones, in the low density zone, they require 2 for the whole development. So I really encourage you to look at those parking tables, say, hey, developers can still build parking where they want to, but we shouldn't mandate it for everyone, because a lot of households are single people or for other reasons don't have cars. 1 out of every 6 renter households doesn't have a car. So there's some efficiency there. If we're really trying to make missing middle succeed, if we're really trying to protect the climate, really trying to cut housing costs, let's not mandate a one-size-fits-all housing for cars. We need housing for people now, and we should really look at that table on those types as well as other types, the multifamily stuff, and the studio and 1-bedrooms. I think there's efficiencies to be gained by reducing those regulations. Thank you for your time, your service to the city.
You're welcome. Any questions for Mr. Manville? I am not seeing any. That is the list that I have. Is there anybody else that would like to testify that didn't get a chance to sign up to testify? If you could raise your hand if you are one of them, and I don't think I see any other names on here that are not familiar. Questions of staff from commissioners. Now's our time to pepper Bryce with the questions that were generated. Commissioner Capcho.
Yes, thank you, President. I'll turn my camera on. Thanks, Bryce. Could you answer for me how much currently ballpark single family zoning makes up in Salem?
I don't know. Yeah, we have Eunice on the, on the call here tonight too.
Yeah, I'm always happy to call
Eunice.
him Eunice too.
Can I throw you under the bus?
Can look it up and get back to you.
Okay. I mean, would it be safe to say somewhere between 75 and 90%? I feel like that's a pretty broad range. So
She'll get back. I think Eunice is
Okay.
looking it up for us. Did you have a
Okay.
follow-up question to that question?
I have another one, and this is not one I expect that could be looked up so quickly, but if it is, then I would be happy to have that done. The tree canopy over the last 30 years, or over the last, I'll say 30, but if there's any period of time, as we have built out and sprawled the city, so to speak, I would be interested to know the before and after. If 30 years ago, if it's number of trees, that would be awesome. If it's a percentage of trees, then that would be awesome. If it's an aerial satellite image of what Salem used to look like in 1990 versus 2020, then that would be cool too.
Our public works staff.
And I don't know if there's an answer for that. So
You're kind of cutting out, Commissioner Capcho. You're doing that little wavy thing underwater sound. And now you're frozen. Now you're back.
Now I'm back.
Now you're back.
Now I'm back.
Now you're back. But I couldn't hear what you said.
Sorry, I dialed in using one of my. You'll have to bear with me if anyone remembers those, maybe. So did I hear Bryce say that Public Works had something regarding that?
Yeah, Public Works does conduct, a tree canopy study. I don't know, Patricia Farrell would have been, who was here earlier to, from Public Works Natural Resources would have been the ideal person to ask that question. But, I don't know how, what the interval is in terms of when the studies are done. I don't know, maybe Lisa might know, but I think we do have data, some data. I just don't know how extensive it is. I don't know how far back it goes. Certainly we have aerial photos that go back years and years and, but, we'd have to.
Did you want to say something or?
I was just going to offer that we do have aerial photos from the 90s, and then we have a 82 and a 62 for older reference. So we, could provide aerials from a certain
we
era.
Also have a tree canopy study that's been done the past, I want to say, 2 10-year cycles. So we do it on
Yes,
a
I
10-year
believe so.
cycle.
Mhm.
So the tree canopy has grown in Salem to 21% from, I think, 17%. So it's been inching up. We are a valley that used to be burned in order to keep things fairly clear. So we never started with a particularly large tree canopy in the first place.
Got it.
Commissioner Capcho, did you have a follow-up question? Then I'm going to go to Mr. Kapani before I go to Commissioner Slater. Mr. Kapani, did you have a question or a comment?
I just had a comment, and it is following up on Commissioner Slater's statement. There is on the city's website a tree canopy assessment. The most recent one was done in 2019. And so I'll put in the chat the link for that
Thank you.
document.
That'd be great. Commissioner Slater, you had your hand raised earlier. Was that your comment a minute ago, or did you have something else to ask?
I do have a question or two to ask. So if I could.
Sure, go ahead.
So Lisa, I know I had kind of floated the idea, I didn't spend a lot of time on it, about exempting Douglas fir trees from the definition of a protected significant tree if it's over 30 inches, primarily for some of the reasons that were mentioned. Safety, particularly, removing one or several of a grove is particularly dangerous. I heard back that potentially that staff did not have much of an appetite for that. Can you speak to that? And my apologies if I'm putting you on the spot.
That's okay. I think that's my job, is to be put on the spot. I think that I would say planning staff has no opinion on it. Patricia and Mylan both stated that they would not recommend that, and then they have left. Sorry, they've left the meeting. They're not here to speak to that. I think their thought is that, Doug firs are trees that grow in this area, and just like other trees, there could be a potential when you remove other trees to make them dangerous, but that's something that would be reviewed with an application, right? And determine at that time if it makes sense to remove that tree if you're removing an entire grove versus keeping the one tree because it's large enough to meet that threshold and having to remove the rest of the trees. So I think the thought was just that they could be handled like any other tree when it's evaluated if it should remain or not.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner
Yeah, I
Slater?
do have a follow-up if I could.
Yes, you may.
And since you notified us that your job is to be put on the spot, I will ask, from my understanding, the planning department does not have a certified arborist on staff that can make kind of sophisticated or nuanced decisions about whether or not a particular tree is going to be safe or unsafe. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely. So when we get a tree removal permit for a tree that's, somebody's saying is hazardous, we review the arborist report that's submitted, and then we have the urban forester review that information and give us a recommendation, and let us know, should we be asking for more information? Do you agree with this report? Sometimes he does a site visit if necessary. So we lean on his expertise.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions of staff? I had a question. So Commissioner Goebel, go ahead.
I had a question. I felt like Mr. Anderson and Mr. Beerley made a compelling testimony regarding the confusion around the definition of waterways and riparian corridors. Is that something we can address during this meeting, or is that something that needs more discussion and research among staff?
Well, Bryce can chime in after me, but I would say that we do have an adopted waterway map. So there's no confusion about what our waterways are. It's an adopted map that went through City Council and is adopted. So I don't think staff would agree that there's confusion about what a riparian corridor is. We have adopted waterways, and then therefore they have riparian corridors that are measured 50 feet from those waterways. I don't know if Bryce, if you had anything to add to that.
Bryce.
I guess I did a good job.
Must have. Did you?
Oh, sorry,
have
sorry. It's going between screens. No, I totally agree. With Lisa. For the way the code is structured, the tree ordinance currently defines a waterway, and then as Lisa indicated, the riparian corridor is the area on either side of the waterway that is, transitions from the aquatic ecosystem to the terrestrial ecosystem, which essentially aligns with the definition, in OAR 660. So by having a map, that has waterways on it, that is more clear and objective, than having just a general definition of a riparian corridor that says an area of transition from an aquatic ecosystem to a terrestrial ecosystem. So I think, I think their issue is there's contention that our waterways map does not account for all the waterways, that may exist in the city of Salem, and there's an issue with the map. But having a map that shows them is a much better way to manage, clear and objective standards and knowing what's a waterway and what is not, than just relying on a definition. And in terms of, confusion, in the definitions between, 808 and the different, requirements, the House Bill 2001, the requirements for that, that requires the 100-foot setback from a riparian, corridor. There was no right definition of a riparian corridor established in House Bill 2001. So, there's that issue. If you default to, OAR 660, 023, 090, it defines a riparian corridor as a Goal 5 resource that includes the water areas, fish habitat, adjacent riparian areas, and wetlands within the riparian area boundary. A riparian area, and then it says riparian area is defined as the area adjacent to a river, lake, or stream consisting of the area of transition from an aquatic ecosystem to a terrestrial one. So the definition of riparian corridor really does doesn't help in OAR 660. Now, you go through the study process and identify them, based on that and put them on the waterways map. That's one thing. But if you look at our definition of waterway under chapter, and I'll share my screen here, that we have currently in the code, it essentially mirrors the requirements or the definition of OAR 660. Let me get my screen sharing here. So we define a riparian corridor. Let's see, I lost my. Oh, sorry, that's in. I got to go to 111. So riparian corridor means the area adjacent to a waterway consisting of the area of transition from an aquatic ecosystem to a terrestrial ecosystem. So that's the language from OAR 660. So it mirrors that. And then it further says that it's measured 50 feet horizontally from the top of bank of a waterway with 1,000 cubic feet or less per second average of annual stream flow, and then 75 feet for greater, which is the Willamette. So this definition of a riparian corridor is more specific than what you find in OAR 660. And then you look at the definition of a waterway, so waterway is defined under 808, and then we're moving that from the tree code 2 definitions. And then we're using the definition of waterway as the basis for the riparian corridor setback. It means any river, perennial stream, or creek designated, designated by the director, within the city by the director. So, and then the riparian corridor is on both sides of the waterway. So we have a clear and objective map that's adopted. Maybe it's not perfect, it doesn't have all the waterways, but we have this map. And so that, we know if there's a mapped waterway in the city, there will be a 100-foot setback from it for middle housing. And then the riparian corridor, on the other hand, would be, less than that, based on the definition. That would be 50 feet horizontally from the top of bank. So we're establishing a greater, setback based on House Bill 2001 of 100 feet, from the top of bank of the waterway. And so you can't have a structure in there. So it is a measure of protection adjacent to that waterway, 100 feet where you can't have a home or a middle housing development within 100 feet from the top of bank on either side of the waterway. Whereas if you were to just go based on our current requirements for riparian corridor, in the code under the tree ordinance, that's 50 feet horizontally from the top of bank, but that is not a true setback. So there's different issues at play here. We don't have, the 50-foot setback called for under Goal 5. We are implementing the 100-foot setback based on House Bill 2001. And then the motion, that was introduced tonight would, further address the issue of, of the required setback, adjacent to a waterway for Goal 5. So.
Okay.
I don't necessarily see a conflict. I think we're operating, under the spirit of House Bill 2001, and we're implementing what House Bill 2001 intentionally, required, of the city of Salem with that bill by establishing that 100-foot setback from the top of bank of a waterway.
Did you have a follow-up, Commissioner Goebel, or are you good?
No, that was really helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think this just further emphasizes the need for that Goal 5 update to clarify where those mapped waterways truly are and aren't. So I appreciate that feedback.
You bet. Commissioner Pollack.
Yeah, so I understand from the testimony of Anderson that they wanted 100 feet from the riparian boundary as opposed to 100 feet from the waterway. And so that would make it 150 feet from the waterway as opposed to what we're proposing now is 100. So that's what I think that I understood from his testimony, that the state law said riparian, not waterway. So 100 feet from riparian. And if we already have 50 feet for the riparian from the waterway, that makes 150 feet, which is quite a bit of there. So I just wanted to say that that's what I understood them to say. Where I agree with it or not, I'm just clarifying what I understood his testimony to be. Okay, that's just.
Hey, can I clarify real quick? Sure. Under OAR 660-023-090, it says it must, a medium or large city that has not adopted land use regulations pursuant to OAR 660-023-090, it must apply a 100-foot setback to middle housing developed along a riparian corridor. And then riparian corridor is not defined in the bill, but it's defined under, OAR 660-023-090, and it's just the area adjacent to a river, lake, or stream consisting of the area of transition from the aquatic ecosystem to the terrestrial ecosystem. So it's saying you have to have 100-foot setback along the riparian corridor. And, our waterways map establishes our known waterways in the city. All those waterways have a riparian corridor associated with them. And so it's 100-foot setback from the top of bank of the riparian corridor. And that's, so it's, the top of bank along the waterway, 100 feet. So it's not, I don't read that to be 150 feet.
No, I'm not saying that, that I'm reading that. I'm saying that's what I thought they meant in their testimony.
Yeah, well, staff has not interpreted it as that.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
You bet. Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. I think this might be for Mr. Kapani. Mr. Byerly made, I thought, a very good point about the fact that there is no process to bring to the attention of the director, or no clear and objective criteria by which the director would make a decision related to what is a waterway. So is that, it deals with the authority of the Public Works Director, which is not related to the Planning Commission. However, this is an issue that's now come up in the Planning Commission. How might we go about dealing with that if we thought, for example, Mr. Byerly was making a useful point?
I think your motion that's on the agenda later tonight is part of that, right? Covers that, getting the city to update the waterways map. Commissioner Slater.
That's a good point. Thank you, Lisa.
But that doesn't necessarily speak to whether or not there's a process. If the map is updated, it's updated, but how do we deal with new information then?
I mean, I suppose they could submit a letter to Public Works with information on a particular area where they think a waterway exists, and then the Public Works Director could determine if that information is sufficient. They could update the waterway map.
Okay, thanks.
Your questions? Commissioner Capcho.
I'm muted. There we go. Fantastic. It's the first time doing this. Sorry. Bryce, I have a question for you on the 510 development standards. I may have brought setbacks up before in conversations. And so has there been any discussion on, because I noticed in the UDC amendments or the UDC update proposed amendments, we haven't made any adjustment to interior side other than, I think, the addition of the 2, 3, 4 and multifamily addition. Is there, from a staff perspective, what's the case for not removing interior side?
Well, that would it would be beyond the scope of what we were, what we're mandated to do under House Bill 2001, and was just to treat middle housing consistently with what we have for single family. It would require us to go through, an analysis to find out, what does it mean to get rid of side yard setbacks between, properties in residential zones that, encompass a large majority of the city now. Granted, in residential zones, if you have an existing building, you can add on to your, single family residential dwelling and come within 3 feet of the side property line, subject to meeting building code requirements for fire separation. So there is the ability, when you build your house initially on the lot, you have to have a 5-foot setback, but then you can expand it down the road, to 3 to be within 3. So there is that. It's just something that, we weren't prepared for to, look at changing eliminating a minimum side yard setback across citywide, in the RSO. And it was just, okay, we need to amend the code to address, middle housing. We currently have standards for single family that are this. The middle housing will be consistent with that.
No, that makes sense. I mean, you definitely had your work cut out for you. So I just like to try to pile on more when I can. I'm just trying to, as we have discussions earlier about tree preservation, we had, a lengthy discussion. I'm sure we will in deliberation as well. I think of the space that's used in setbacks and others. If we're trying to preserve trees, where else are we using space? And is that space that we're reserving necessary? And so that's all I'm trying to think through. So thank you for your answer.
Commissioner Pollack.
I have a question for our attorney. And is there any way that we can have this packet go forward minus a section that might be, in other words, it's kind of like a contract, making a specific update severable so that we can go forward with the bulk of it, but maybe have something hold it back because, we might want to give it a little more thought based on the testimony. Is there a way we can do that?
Well, I think staff is desirous that the thing go forward as an entire package. Is that right, Lisa?
Yeah, well, see, you don't have to make a decision tonight. So if you have questions or comments or changes you want made, and we get that information from you, you can continue the hearing, right, to another date, so that it doesn't have to be done tonight. Also, the Planning Commission rules say you can only have a legislative amendment for 90 days. So this is the package that's been presented. You could make a motion that the council adopt all of it except a certain section, right? And you could ask them to delay it or something in a certain section, but you can only have this amendment for 90 days before you move everything in here with a recommendation on yay or nay forward to the city council. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Pollack?
Yeah, I just wish Commissioner McKinley was here, so I don't have to be put in the hot seat here.
Don't you love being in the hot seat? It's so much fun.
Oh, this is why I don't want to be vice president or president. Okay, no more questions.
Okay, just a question to Bryce, I think, or maybe to Lisa. We heard all the developers raise a concern about the tree, the protection around the trees, the significant trees, et cetera. All trees, actually. And it sounds like there's not much tolerance for eliminating the Doug fir from significant tree category, according to what you said, Lisa, from Patricia and our urban forester. What about the elimination of the fencing on non-significant trees? Because that sounded like that was sort of a compromise between several issues that they raised. Is there any tolerance for that?
Well, the code today says that all trees that you say you're going to save in your plan have to be marked for preservation.
Right.
And we get a lot of complaints about there's activity happening and the trees, there's no fencing. And we have to go out there and say, you didn't mark it for preservation. And they say, fine, tell me where to put my fence. I don't know. Mark it for preservation. What does that mean? I have no idea. It makes it very difficult to tell anybody what they're supposed to be doing or enforce it when they're not doing the correct thing. So I definitely think there needs to be a standard because it leaves us in an awkward position of not really having a standard that we can enforce as far as making sure people have the correct fencing. And then I think that, the standard that we've picked, as you heard from Mylan, is pretty much an industry standard, really is meant to say if your tree plan that goes through this public process shows you're going to save that tree, then you need to save that tree, right? And so grading underneath the tree roots, compacting it, parking your equipment there, whatever, is not actually saving that tree. And so if you can't save that tree, if you have to do those activities there, then you should show that you're not going to save the tree instead of telling people you're going to save the tree, but then not taking the steps to ensure that the tree lives. So from my mind, I don't understand that as a compromise. I see that as we want to show that we're going to save a tree, but we don't want to actually have to save the tree. And that seems like a conflict. So that's why I think staff thinks that there should be fencing requirements. And as Mylan said, the 70% is pretty, common industry standard. I will say too, I heard a lot of testimony about the small lots that will be required with the density standards. And I just want to clarify, there's no requirement for small lots. There'll be if the density standards are adopted, it will be a requirement for a certain amount of units within a subdivision. And the developer can do that in any number of ways. Larger lots that have duplexes or fourplexes, or a lot of regular lots, and then maybe a few lots with sixplexes or cottage clusters, or a lot with everyone has, an ADU might meet the density. So there's no requirement necessarily that the lots get smaller with this future density requirement if they get adopted. So I just want to provide that clarity because I think that was stated a few times.
Okay, Commissioner Levin.
Thank you. Bryce, can you remind me again, what is the multiplier that's being used for the root protection zone based on the diameter of the tree?
It's 1 foot for every 1 inch.
1 foot for 1 inch. Okay.
And that's radius. Yeah.
Yeah. I was doing some quick definition searching on using Google to see what came up, and seeing that there's different numbers that are used by different municipalities for that multiplier. 1 foot definitely seemed to be on the lower end of that, but I keep running into problems with this root protection zone and building envelopes, and especially as it applies to infill development. So I feel like the way this is currently written creates too much conflict, that if this was to state that new subdivisions, as we were talking about in some of the subcommittee conversation regarding our Salem, and then I think even at planning commission work sessions, we've talked about what is it, like 5.5 units per acre as a new development standard going forward on residential developments. And we talked about acreage sizes that would apply to, which tended to gear towards subdivisions that would have multiple lots. And I'm about to get interrupted here, probably. I don't know if anybody heard that in the background. So he's a talker too. And I'm worried that this root protection plan is intended for subdivisions, but then when applied to somebody that's trying to work with like infill couple of lots, I can think of a 3/4 acre parcel in West Salem that I was looking at, and then as well as sorry guys,
cute.
And at least he'll be quiet up here. And there's a property that's at 2 parcels in north of downtown, where the existing homes and the topography are creating an issue with how to work around that then root protection zone in trying to improve or update or remodel that property, because it is written solely just like focused on like clearing new land and new subdivisions. But so there's so much, I think, as was noted by past President Fry, that Salem is a lot of infill development at this point, and that the larger scale subdivision development is happening more commonly outside the city of Salem. And so it's the thinking about some of the comments that Commissioner Slater made. It occurred to me that I grew up in one of those streets that has trees all over the place. So I grew up on Winding Way. So Southeast Salem, across from Carl B. Clean. Now I think it's like Washman or something. But if you go into that neighborhood, older homes, it used to be a fruit orchard, but lots and lots of old growth trees. The house I grew up in, we actually had over a 200-year-old tree that was in an atrium. The home was built around this tree. And that was during a remodel that was cut down, and it was noted that the tree was perfectly healthy. And a home had been built around it. We had disturbed and impacted soil, not we, my family. We bought this years and years after this had been done, but it occurred to me that Welcome Way and Winding Way in Salem are really good local examples of where we have lots of development that overlaps that root zone, that all those streets are examples of actually the opposite, that trees do survive when that root zone has been impacted. So I feel like that actually creates a little bit of discrepancy about some of the information that was provided. And so I'm struggling kind of with the request to give this a vote and move this forward. So those are some comments following my question to Bryce. Sorry.
Okay. Other questions of staff before I look for a motion from our Vice President?
Commissioner Griggs, can I address, I took some notes on a few of those questions. I just wanted to address, there was the question about the setback issue and the confusion over, what it means in the table to say that there's no setback adjacent to a waterway and how that relates to the other provisions. So I just wanted to take a real quick moment to, again, I'll share my screen here and explain how the code is structured and how, that I think we have the language in there that eliminates any kind of confusion. So this is from the RS zone on the screen here. And so abutting a waterway, this is the new section of the setback table. And so it says single family, minimum 100 feet, applicable to townhouses. And then because that's a new middle housing, that's a middle housing type. And then for other single family, none. It says none, and that says applicable to all other single family, but there's a second sentence under here that's a further limitation and qualification that says all other setbacks required abutting streets and interior front, side, and rear property lines still apply. So if you have a waterway adjacent to your rear property line and it's a waterway adjacent to the interior rear, abutting the waterway itself, you have no setback because it's a single family home. But pursuant to this language right here, all the other interior front, side, and rear setbacks still apply. So you go up here and you find, okay, what is the interior rear setback for a single family dwelling? So we see the multifamily, it's 10, all other uses, it's 14 or 20, dependent upon the number of stories. So we still have clearly a minimum rear yard setback in the table for a single family dwelling adjacent to a waterway, still 14 or 20. Now, the other sections that are referenced in the written testimony provided talk about the requirements for stream bank easements and chapter. The chapter is escaping me, but there is a public works requirement for a stream bank maintenance easement of 15 feet from the center line or 10 feet from the top of bank on each side of a waterway. Those still apply regardless. So staff does not believe there's any inconsistency or confusion in terms of the setbacks abutting setbacks when it says none adjacent to a waterway. The other thing I wanted to point out was the preservation requirement. The preservation requirement under tree conservation plans, it's 30%, and that is the minimum, for the trees on the property. So if you had one significant tree on your, property, and that's not, and you had like 100 trees on your property, that's not going to equal, 30%. So 100 trees on your property, 30% is 30 trees. That's the preservation requirement. Now, if you had 35 significant trees on your property, those would have to be, you would be required to preserve more than 30%. But if you only had 2 significant trees on your property and then the rest were non-significant trees, you would have to have 28 normal trees, and then the 2 significant trees would have to be included. So those significant trees do count towards the 30% preservation requirement. So I wanted to clarify that. And then the cottage cluster, standards that were mentioned in terms of, and how those are a little bit different, and under the code in terms of what has been developed on Fairmont. The Fairmont development, that was a plan unit development. So we're not getting rid of the ability to do a PUD. That will still remain. So if a person wanted to, have additional flexibility beyond what the normal zoning code would allow, a PUD would be a mechanism that would still be available. And the cottage cluster standards that are included in the proposed amendments are directly, mandated from House Bill 2001. So the 900 square foot footprint, those are requirements. That's a requirement of House Bill 2001. But that does not preclude, somebody from doing something different from that. If they wanted to do through a plan unit development, you could still achieve, that flexibility and that different development pattern. So
that's a good clarification. That was on my list. What about Mr. Moore's request for a smaller enclosure size for smaller birds?
That seems like it's reasonable. Lisa, Lisa has kind of helped me draft the poultry amendment. I think she might be more of the expert on poultry.
Oh no, not an expert. I think that seems reasonable. And if you end up voting tonight, you could have a motion that just directs staff to add in a smaller enclosure size, and we could just do that before we take it to council. Also, I wanted to add to Bryce's comments that he was adding there is a provision in this that you can, Mr. Olson was talking about land divisions for the cottage clusters, and that is in here. That's a Senate Bill 458 or something. I can't remember the number. It was on one of Bryce's slides. So that is a new state law that says when you do the middle housing, now we do also have to allow you to subdivide it so people can have home ownership opportunities for that middle housing. And so I'm not sure if Eric saw that or not, but that is in the code amendments before you tonight.
What about Mr. Olson's other comment about alley access on family homes abutting alleys? His concern of having.
Yeah, and I'll let Bryce jump in, but I will clarify that it wouldn't, for example, apply in Fairview where Eric is doing his recent development because they have their own standards. That request came out of the Grant neighborhood and the Nen neighborhood. So these older neighborhoods where they have alleys, which is pretty rare in Salem to have an alley, right? But our older neighborhoods do. There's been some instances of houses burning down or being demolished due to neglect. And then a new person comes in to build a house, which the neighborhood's really happy about. But then they want to put in a driveway in the front and nobody else on the street has a driveway. Everybody uses an alley. And so we don't have a provision to prohibit that. And so we got a lot of, angst directed our way about it. And we said, well, the code just allows it. It's just a regular house. And they said, but it doesn't fit the character at all. This person's just putting in a driveway, they're removing on-street parking, a street tree to do it, et cetera. And so they've really wanted us to put that provision in. Now, obviously there's situations where people won't be able to use an alley or won't make sense. And there would be a provision for them to ask to use the street, but under this code, it would be the alley is the first option instead of right now that there's nothing to push them to use the alley. So.
That makes sense. Okay. Other questions of staff? Eunice, how are you, my friend? Your face.
I just wanted to answer Commissioner Kopch's question. The amount of land that's residential, single family or residential agriculture, RARs, is actually closer to 45% of the land in the city.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Commissioner Pollock, are you ready to make a motion, dear friend?
Okay, here goes. I want to make a motion to adopt the finding and facts of the original October 5th, 2021 staff report together with the finding and facts included in this supplemental staff report and recommend that the city council accept the first reading of the ordinance bill to amend the UDC and other chapters of the Salem Revised Code to address issues that have arisen in the application of the UDC since 2019 and to change the zoning of the properties within the downtown general retail overlay zone that are currently zoned RH, CO, CR, CV in order to align their zoning with their existing central business district comprehensive plan designation. Does that cover everything?
I think you did, unless you want to add in there this changing the enclosure size for small birds.
Oh, yes.
Non-controversial.
Okay, and amend.
Direct staff to amend the language on the size of enclosures for small birds.
And direct staff to amend the sizing of enclosures for small birds.
Yeah, because that's not going to be controversial, I'm pretty sure. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second by Slater.
Thank you. Let's discuss. Keeping in mind it's 10:09, we may need to have a vote to extend the meeting. Okay, I'm seeing Commissioner Pollock's hand.
Can I actually fight against my own motion? Because yeah, the root thing, I'm not I'm talking about the our tree plan. I'm really I understand staff's difficulty and especially those trying to get the construction guys to do anything. I mean, even trying to get the construction guys to put protections around the stormwater drain is a ridiculous situation. So I understand why staff would want a standard for the root barrier. But I'm concerned that if you're not going to be able to do the root barrier, they just cut the trees down altogether and then build and then plant new ones. That's not, I don't think that's really the goal that they were trying to do. So I'm kind of worried about that. So I'm wondering if,
If your motion fails, you'd be able to somebody else can make another motion. But
okay, good. I'm just going to put it out there for discussion about that.
Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. So I really need to speak to this issue of the critical root zone. So the American National Standards Institute has developed a whole set of standards around how to protect trees in a construction zone. And that was a set of standards that was put together by a large panel of professionals, arborists, professors, experts in the construction industry, the same kind of panel that you would come together for any sort of American National Standards recommendation or guidelines. So that's where that diameter per inch comes from. It's not the staff suggestion. It's not an arbitrary suggestion. It is a recommendation that has been developed through a long research process and public process to create a standard. The problem that we've learned over the past many years is that tree roots are very vulnerable to compaction. After a certain density, soil density, trees are not able to draw out water and they're not able to draw out air. And so what happens is when tree roots get compacted in the construction process, they eventually suffocate or they experience drought. And it happens over many, many years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So what happens is homeowners will buy a piece of land with some trees on it. And 3 or 4 or 5 years later, the tree will be dying. They don't understand what's going wrong. They have to take it down themselves or they live with the risk. This is really as much about misrepresentation. It's much about public safety. It's as much about full disclosure to homeowners as it is anything else. So it is better to take down a tree than it is to do construction around the critical root zones. So if we're concerned about the critical root zones, I really think that we should talk about how to create a process or what our preservation standards are rather than try and play around with exempting the critical root zone. It is just fundamentally, it's a misrepresentation to the public to get a tree on their property that has had construction within that critical root zone. And no, it's not 100%. It's probably closer to 70%, but it is pretty significant. So I really encourage us to not play around with that. And I would be happy if people would support it to make a motion to exempt fir trees, Douglas fir trees, from the definition of a significant tree. I know my colleagues over at Natural Resources would object to that, but I do think that is a safety issue. And I do know that there are people that will absolutely cut them down before they move into a house with those around. So I would just offer those two things.
So Lisa and or Tom, is Commissioner Pollack able to accept a friendly amendment to exclude Doug firs from the significant tree category?
I think we need an actual amendment and you need to vote on the amendment.
Okay. So are you making that amendment, Commissioner Slater?
Yeah, I will go ahead and move that we exempt Douglas fir trees from the definition for inclusion in the definition of a significant tree.
Do I have a second?
Second by Levin.
Levin, second. Discussion on the motion. And that is to exclude Doug firs from the significant tree category. I think we all understand what that means. So Shelby, will you call the roll on that vote? Signify by saying aye if you're in favor of that amendment to the underlying motion, nay if you are opposed.
Commissioner Augustine.
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel.
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs.
Aye.
Commissioner Heller ended up leaving, so absent. Commissioner Kopcho.
Aye.
Commissioner Levin.
Aye.
Commissioner Pollack.
Aye.
And Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Okay, that amendment passed. That motion passed to amend the underlying motion. Back to the discussion on the underlying motion. Is there any more conversation? Commissioner Pollock.
I find Commissioner Slater's statement on the root protection area is compelling and does take me off the fence. I would just leave the tree preservation as written. I would be approved of that.
Okay. Commissioner Levin.
Thank you. And I respect the information that Commissioner Slater shared, and I think that in the right circumstances, respecting that root protection zone makes absolute sense. And the issue that I take with the way that the code is currently drafted is that the remodel or reuse of existing property is impacted by this, and the cost and associated with the identification of the root zone for a tiny parcel all the way to the protection and then possibly having to tear down but not being able to build back, or to go through the one of the conditional approval processes of showing the hardship or something else, sounds very expensive to me for something that is small and infill, and there should be the adaptability in the code from the beginning to address that type of issue from the start. And the fact that we have the conversation about evaluating certain subdivisions based on their minimum acreage and whether or not they'll be required to meet a certain minimum density, we clearly have the ability to recognize the difference between new blank slate type development. Blank slate is in air quotes because nothing is a perfect blank slate. Then the difference between everything else, which is existing, somehow partially developed, maybe needing to be redeveloped, or maybe just needing to be remodeled. But saying that I can't go now disturb the soil because I'm within the root zone of an existing tree, but it's an existing property that's been there since the 1920s, and it's either going to sit there and decay because nobody can do anything with it, or I got to go through and spend a bunch of money that makes then the project I did not feasible. It just seems like it creates a conflict that then later we're going to be amending at another work session. So I'm really struggling with the current language in that. I think the rest of this package is agreeable. And I appreciate the amendment by Commissioner Slater regarding the Doug firs. So the reality is that sometimes that some trees have a different root structure that don't maybe allow that individual protection. And so I think the risk with Doug firs, especially here, it does make a lot of sense. And I've had a Doug fir that was a city tree, not a normal city tree, but I did have one come down on a property I own in the windstorm of 2007, and almost severed a garage. So and that had been there for a long time. And had not been compromised. It had actually been planted later. And so the reality of maybe some of the nuance, I just feel like there's some added definition that we need to some of this about this protected root zone and how it relates to smaller infill developments. And developments being a broad term. I don't want people to think of I'm coming and clearing an acre or two. I'm talking about an existing derelict single-family residence on a CO zone north of downtown, without giving a specific address, but there's a significant white oak on the property and it's less than 30 feet from the home. So how does anybody go fix that home and make it an occupiable residence that can house one of the people we need in this community when there's this underlying issue? And now this tree preservation part of the code goes through, and now nobody can touch that home or do anything. I'm struggling with how I see a path forward for someone that's willing to do that remodel on that home. You're not going to get Comfort Homes to buy that property.
Can we have you hold that thought, because I need a motion to extend the meeting by 30 minutes since we're a minute and a half away. I'm sure one of you will extend it.
So moved. I move that we extend the meeting by 30 minutes.
Thank you. And seconded by?
Second by Levin.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Levin, but I needed to get that done.
I think I need to vote. Get a
Oh,
vote
yeah, you
on that
sure
one.
do.
Yeah.
Discussion on that motion? No discussion. Will you call the roll? Signify by saying aye if you're in favor of staying here for 30 more minutes.
Commissioner Augustine,
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock,
Aye.
and Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Motion passed. Before I get to you, Commissioner Slater, Commissioner Levin, I cut you off. So did you have other thoughts?
No, you cut me off right as I was about to conclude.
Okay, good. Commissioner Slater.
Thank you. So I understand Commissioner Levin's point. I mean, it is challenging trying to site your environment, your building, do work within that critical root zone, and it does create some cost, maybe not quite as much as you might think, but I recognize that. And so what I would suggest is that perhaps you and I sit down with staff, or whoever else would like to be involved, and we see if we can craft some sort of policy proposal that we can get to the city council before they get to this and finalize it. Because I do think there is probably a way to address those specific situations.
So if I'm understanding you, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, Commissioner Slater, is that we would go forward with the motion, but then before council makes the decision, we would have a proposal for them to consider to amend the language.
That is what I'm offering to help craft.
Okay. What do you think about that, Commissioner Levin? I can't hear you.
Sorry. I think that's totally reasonable. If maybe Lisa would jump back in and give comment if that's feasible. And I thought for a split second while I was rambling that I saw her hand pop up. Maybe in
that was to
regards
extend the meeting.
That was, yeah.
Right.
That's an odd offer, I guess I will say. If you vote on this tonight, that is your formal recommendation to the council, right? So to then have another recommendation, I'm not sure how that works. So if you're not happy with the language tonight, again, you don't have to adopt it tonight. You could continue it to another hearing date and have the full commission consider revised language, but it doesn't seem like it seems like not the way to do it, Commissioner Slater. While I appreciate that, if this is approved tonight, then that is formally your recommendation to City Council.
So then the other option is to not approve the motion that's before us, but then to make a motion to continue the hearing to allow staff and Commissioner Slater and Commissioner Levin and maybe somebody from the development community to work on revised language. Is that what I'm hearing? Those are the two options.
Could direct us to do revised language. Yes.
I hate directing you. Okay, Commissioner Goebel.
My question is if we could only continue the hearing on the tree preservation standards and move forward to the rest of the package so that we don't need to reintroduce testimony or continue the other portions of that. Is that an option, or would you recommend us doing that, Lisa?
No, because some of the amendments in the tree chapter are for the House Bill 2001, so they're really kind of integrated together. So I think just the whole package goes together.
Are people, I have a question that's kind of tied to yours, Commissioner Gopal, and did you have a follow-up to your question before I ask my? So if the hearing is continued and we have to allow more testimony to come in, doesn't it need to be new testimony?
This is not quasi judicial.
Yeah, I think you can receive more testimony, the same folks. Ideally, if they've already testified, then they would just be testifying on anything that was changed before the next hearing, but I don't think there's a limitation.
Okay, so other conversations around the motion before us, which is to approve staff recommendation, which with the amendment that the Doug fir be taken out of the significant tree category. That's the motion before us. Any more conversations about that?
I guess I have one question for Lisa.
Yes.
So Lisa, am I understanding you correctly that the Planning Commission will at some point move this document forward in some form, and after that, there's no further communication from the commission? We don't revisit anything. We don't offer any further thoughts on this. It's one and done.
Correct. I mean, there's nothing to prevent you as an individual from testifying at council, but you will be voting, and your vote will be an official recommendation to City Council on these amendments.
And I guess what I'm saying is that then the commission can no longer consider this. It's just outside its purview now.
Correct. It will have been forwarded to City Council. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's helpful information.
Okay, Commissioner Kopcho.
Sure. Thank you, President. I wanted to address a couple of the comments that I guess we heard in testimony, although they haven't come up, so they might not be controversial, but I'm going to bring them up anyway. And so one is the notion of Corvallis somehow being a bellwether for Salem. And, you know, the correlation between tree preservation and home prices. I could just as well make the case that Corvallis has the most Oregon Beavers alumni per capita and the highest home prices. Therefore, all places that have a lot of Oregon Beaver alumni are very expensive to live. And it holds together just as well. So it's not really an argument that I buy too much, because the fact is we can and we have to have abundant trees and abundant housing to solve livability and affordability issue. It's not a matter of one or the other, which is what House Bill 2001 and these changes are kind of working to do. We heard tonight that half or almost half of all the land and housing used for housing in Salem has been done in single family zones, and new multifamily housing will be built in the city, and there will be conflicts with trees, which is what we're talking about a lot of this conversation anyway, other than the small birds. So if we want to preserve them, we're going to need to continue reforming code to do things like allowing for reduced setbacks or for more height where applicable, or just more buildable area on parcels that have acceptable tree or exceptional trees, excuse me. So we can do strategic things to increase available area for trees. One of the other things that I heard, and I won't mention who said it by name, but you'll know when I start saying it, was regarding solar and trees. I can wax poetically about the differences between microinverters, power optimizers, and the different efficiency ratios of probably 7 or 8 different solar manufacturers for residential PV, as well as the differences between string inverters. I'm not going to do any of that, but it's all to say that rooftop residential solar and trees can coexist and does all around the world. I could cite many examples, as I'm sure others can, from places like Stuttgart, Germany, because why not? But I think that the proposals before us are solid. I like the conversation around the root system that Commissioners Levin and Slater are having, and I'm looking forward to moving this through. I think it's fine work on behalf of the staff.
So what's your feeling on keeping the hearing open and having work done on that particular topic?
Since you asked,
yes.
I would much rather have a continuance than another continuance tonight and stay until 10 o'clock.
Clearly put. Commissioner Pollock.
So I was part of the zone changes regarding greenhouse gases. And the home builders brought this up about the density and the proposed trees and butting heads against it. But I find it very compelling, the statement that Lisa made, that density is about the larger picture, and they have the flexibility on how to make that density work. And they also are in control of their tree preservation. So with that, and I'm not talking about Commissioner Levine's infill, I'm talking about the bigger, but the thing is that property, and I've said this over and over again, property is unique. And because I don't feel that we should hold this up for a possibility of some infill development, when I think maybe we should have a sort of wait and see and then see how it works, and then come back maybe later on with some other changes to the code when it comes to infill.
Sorry, what I'm hearing you say now is that you're not going to kill your motion.
I'm not going to kill it. I'm going to go forward with it.
Okay. Commissioner Slater.
I agree with Commissioner Pollock.
Oh, yay. That was so easy. Commissioner Kopcho, your hand's still raised. You want to talk again?
I do. I thought of something. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But we're here till 9:30 now. So one of the things that I had in my notes that I wrote over and couldn't read until 30 seconds ago was regarding the minimum parking requirements that one of the individuals testified about. And so I would certainly be, and kind of always have been, amenable to eliminating them everywhere. But certainly in the duplex, triplex, quadplex situations, I'm of the mindset, and I think we've had folks testify in the past, developers and residents alike, that eliminating them isn't going to make parking go away. Developers aren't going to just stop building it because they wouldn't be able to sell anything, and it wouldn't make any sense. But it does offer flexibility. It does offer the ability to use space in a more flexible manner, whether it's for open space, whether it's green space, whether it's for structure. And so I would be certainly amenable to such a motion, or I'll just put one out there, I guess, myself, if we want to do that.
So you're making a motion to amend the underlying motion to eliminate parking requirements in middle housing.
Yes.
Something
Move
like
the mandated spaces to 0 for the duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes.
Which is middle housing, yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, do I have a second on that motion to amend?
I second that motion.
Second is Commissioner Goebel. Sorry, I'm writing this down so I don't get messed up. So, discussion on the motion. Seeing none, Shelby, will you call the roll and signify by saying aye if you are in favor of the motion to amend the underlying motion to eliminate parking requirements for middle housing?
Commissioner Augustine?
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel?
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho?
Aye.
Commissioner Levin?
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock?
Aye.
And Commissioner Slater?
Aye.
Motion passed. So we have two amendments to that underlying motion. Bryce.
Hey, so I hope I'm not late. I just want to clarify. So when we say middle housing, the way we have it structured, it means 2 family, 3 family, 4 family use. So it wouldn't just be a duplex or a triplex. It could be 2 units detached on a lot. Just want to make sure that's clear. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was Mr. Manville's suggestion. Okay, back to discussion on the underlying motion. Are we having some fun now?
Well, yeah. Well, since we're talking, may I?
Yes, you may, Commissioner.
Yeah,
Coppell.
let's just go for it. You
We
guys
do have
know-
other things on the agenda.
I know. The last one, since we're talking about parking, I would like to put forward an amendment to limit the multifamily to 1. So 1 per unit instead of, I think, is it 1.5 now?
Bryce?
It depends on the number of, it's 1 for if it's, based on the number, it gets a little bit complicated. Well, not so much, but based on the number of units, if it's less than 12 units, correct me if I'm wrong, less than 12, it's 1 for multifamily, but 13 or more, it is based on the number of, if a studio or 1 bedroom is 1, but then it's 1.5 for anything other than that. Is that right, Eunice?
Yeah, 5 to 12 is basically 0 or 1, and then it's based on bedroom type. And then again, within the core network in the downtown, it's 0.
So how would you like to word that, Commissioner Kopcho?
Wouldn't it be so much nicer and simpler just to say 1 for all of them? So that's what I would propose.
1 parking space per multifamily unit?
Yeah.
Bryce, okay, so that's the motion to amend the 3rd one. And I need a second before we have discussion.
I'm sorry, can we repeat it for me? There was a lot of conversation, so I want to make sure that I get the actual motion language down correctly in the minute.
Commissioner Kopcho?
To amend the underlying motion to limit required parking to 1 space per multifamily dwelling unit.
Did you get that, Shelby?
Yes, thank you.
I do need a second on that motion.
I'll second.
Commissioner Slater is our second. Discussion on the motion? So the motion to amend is to limit the parking requirements for 1 parking space per 1 multifamily unit. Something like that. Shelby's got it more accurately portrayed. I know she has. So discussion on the motion. Shelby, would you please call the roll and signify by saying aye if you are supportive of that 3rd amendment to the underlying motion?
Commissioner Augustine?
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel?
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho?
Aye.
Commissioner Levin?
Nay.
Commissioner Pollock?
Nay.
And Commissioner Slater?
Aye.
Okay, motion passed. Back to that underlying motion that we're talking about. Any further discussion on the motion? Otherwise, I'm going to call for the vote. Shelby, will you please call the roll and signify by saying aye if you are in favor of the motion as amended to eliminate the Doug firs from the significant tree category, to eliminate parking requirements in middle housing, and to also to limit parking requirements for multifamily units for 1 space per 1 multifamily unit.
Plus, don't forget the requirement on the underlying one to redo the spaces for small birds. Remember?
Oh, yes, and the small birds. Yes, we have
Yeah,
that
it's
one
not
too.
an amendment. It's not an amendment. It's it's instruction.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Thomas, you had your hand raised and now you done. Are you done?
Right, I was just going to remind you about the small birds.
Thank you. The small birds are so cute.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I have one quick question.
Sure.
I'm so sorry. Since we are instructing staff, can we instruct staff to come up with a proposal related with how to deal with significant trees near structures and infill development?
Lisa?
Yes, you can make a motion to include some sort of revision related to that, if you are clear enough on what you want us to do.
As part of the underlying motion, another amendment?
Another
That was
amendment.
like a challenge. Did you notice that? It was a challenge. I'm going to pass the challenge over to Commissioner Levin.
Yeah.
And see if he wants to take it. Since I feel like I'm his advocate here.
Commissioner Levin, do you have a motion to amend the underlying motion?
Boy, I'm trying to gather my words.
I know, I'm out of words.
Commissioner Levin, some of your comments had to do with rehabbing existing structures. And so obviously if the footprint is not changed, then the tree ordinance doesn't kick in, right? But I wasn't sure if you meant when that like an addition is done to a house, if that's what you were concerned about.
Yeah, I think if I was to try to phrase a motion based on the conversation, the explanation, and reading of the draft code, my recommendation for an amendment to the underlying motion would be that the root preservation plan regarding infill developments where a building footprint is being augmented, that be let's see, how is it? The tree root preservation area would be reduced by a percentage ooh, how would that I'm trying to come up with a relationship that would make sense. So like a reduction based on the percentage of impact to the root protection zone. It's not clear. Sorry, guys, but what I'm trying to get at is where if an existing site and let's say the footprint is wanting to be augmented, but they're right at the edge of the root protection zone and they need to overlap it by 3 feet, and that's less than 15% or 10% of that root protection zone, and they should be allowed that adjustment.
Bryce has got his hand raised. Maybe he's going to help you.
That's already allowed under the amendments. If you look under the tree protection standards under 808-046, under that section, it says that you can excavate up to 30% of the critical root zone with an arborist report. And so you could be within it if you demonstrate that, up to 30% of it. So if you're into like 3 feet, or you're saying 15%, that would be half of what you could do, under with an arborist report under the proposed amendments.
That's under 46?
808, hopefully, let me look. Let me get the right citation here. It's just talking off the top. Let's see here.
So notwithstanding, grading may be allowed up to a maximum.
So yeah, it wouldn't be 46, right? It's oh, sorry, did you find it? Sounds like you might have. Yeah, 808-046, yeah.
Yeah, sub
4.
A4. Yeah. Okay. I can be comfortable with that.
Okay,
Okay. Excellent.
sounds good. Okay, so we are still under discussion on that under Commissioner Capcho.
Yes, this, thank you for the discussion. This has given me time to consider another amendment, but before I do that, yeah, hey, you're not muted. I heard your laugh, Commissioner Levin. Shame on you. If I may offer a motion first to continue the meeting for probably 15 minutes.
For 15, beyond the 9:30 to 9:45?
That just because we do have other items and I want
Yes,
to
I
make
know.
sure. Yeah,
But you're just doing it for 15 minutes, not 30.
I think we'll get there.
Motion to extend the
I'll
meeting
stop
to
talking.
9:45, and who is my second?
I second it.
Pollock is my second. Discussion on the motion. Shelby, will you call the roll? Signify by saying aye if you're okay with staying here for 15 more minutes.
Commissioner Augustine,
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Capcho,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock,
Aye.
and Commissioner Slater.
Aye. But I will say my parking expires at 11:55 p.m.
Well, I'm gonna put forward a motion to eliminate that.
Okay, so what is your fourth motion?
My fourth motion.
I mean, the fourth motion is not your fourth.
Well, I would like to amend, I think it is 701030, which is in the camping, to change it from inline. I've done a lot of work for our unsheltered population. And so in reading some of the testimony that we received and understanding how the quarter mile and I'm totally getting off track with what the amendment is. So let me finish that and then I'll go back. So changing it from a quarter mile to within 1/2 mile in that section there. So Lisa or Bryce, do you have a?
I think that's in the amendments. That's in the
Yeah, it's okay, supplemental.
supplemental report. We're recommending that. So
Yeah.
it's included in the motion.
In the updated one.
Yes.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about it.
Okay. Well,
have
I
another
did step
fourth
out
one?
I did step out for a while during our meeting, so maybe
We noticed.
Hey, okay. No, I have nothing else. You're
That's it.
welcome.
That's all you got.
I can come up with more. but-
No, I'm sure you could. Bryce, you have your hand raised.
But that was just to jump in and say it was already in the supplemental. So yep.
Okay, perfect. So we still have this motion, the original motion that's been amended 1, 2, 3 times, and with direction for staff to reword the small bird enclosures. Any further discussion on this motion? Yay. Shelby, will you please call the roll? Signify by saying aye if you are in favor of the motion with the amendments, underlying amendments. Nay if you're not.
Commissioner Augustine,
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Capcho,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock,
Aye.
and Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you. Thank you guys for the discussion. So we're to 6.1 and a motion from Commissioner Slater regarding goal 5 and the lovely letter that he wrote for me, which is great. Commissioner Slater.
I didn't write the letter, just to be clear, but one of our lovely staff wrote it instead. So I guess at this point, I will just make a motion that that we vote to send this draft letter off to the city council.
I need a second.
I second it.
Commissioner Pollock is our second. Discussion on the motion. I think staff, whoever wrote this, I think they did a good job. I think this is the most that we can hope for. I think we would all like goal 5 to be totally updated, but as Lisa has mentioned, there's many things on their list of things to do and that will need to be funded. So I think this is a good first step compromise. So thank you to your staff, Mike. Any other comments? I mean, I'm the only one talking. You guys are getting tired. Okay, Okay, we have a
I think the
motion.
letter- Yeah, I think the letter speaks for itself, and I hope
I
that
think so
people vote for it.
Okay. Seeing no hands raised, the motion to send this on to City Council. Shelby, will you call the roll? Please signify by saying aye if you are in favor of the motion, nay if you're opposed.
Commissioner Augustine,
Aye.
Commissioner Goebel,
Aye.
Commissioner Griggs,
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho,
Aye.
Commissioner Levin,
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock,
Aye.
and Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Motion passed. Thank you. No information reports, no more public comment. Lisa, do you have a report for us?
Just a reminder that we have our Salem work session on the 18th. So please, I hope you all attend. And then it looks like we do have a public hearing scheduled on the 19th. We tried to cancel, but now we do have a hearing. So please also show up on the 19th.
Okay.
And that's all I have, unless you have questions for me.
Questions for Lisa? I think we're all kind of spent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any good comments from commissioners? Commissioner Kopcho.
We didn't need the 15 minutes.
Hey, it's a gift. Gift back to you.
That's all I got.
That's it. Thank you, Commissioner Pollock, for stepping in as VP on a tough one. That was a lot to. We're a good sport. Didn't want you to leave in December and not have to do this.
Oh, shit. Yeah, well, you're welcome.
Commissioner Slater, were you raising your hand or just your box went kind of crazy? Seeing no further comments from commissioners, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.